It's been 2 decades since I landed in this world. Ever since I reincarnated here. The name's Wang Hu, and I hit the sheets in Anil Village, a tiny settlement nestled right against the massive, looming Green Bull Mountains of Liang Province. Just today, Liurnio came sprinting up to my gate, hollering that the county bureaucrats had rolled into town. Right then and there, I knew what was up. The imperial court was distributing brides again. They pull this stunt every 3 years out here on the frontier. Survival is brutal in Liang Province. We're basically wedged between 3 rival powers. The mighty Great Qin dynasty, the Northernly Kingdom, and the savage Chon barbarians. Because of that, the warfare never really lets up. To stop the locals from packing up and fleeing, the government hooks the young bachelors up with wives, mostly women taken captive from enemy territories. I bolted up and ran alongside Ernio, straight toward the eastern side of the village. Practically the entire neighborhood had crowded together. Beneath the shade of the old willow tree, folks kept shouting out greetings as I pushed past. I'm a pretty big deal around these parts. Hands down the best hunter across 10 neighboring villages. I've been tracking game in those peaks since I was 17, and I bring back more meat than all the other locals put together. While most households are scraping by just to eat, my place is packed with stockpiled grain and cured jerky. And that's exactly why the young widows around the village are constantly inventing random reasons to stroll past my front porch. But I've got a little secret that nobody else knows. The moment I turned 18, I unlocked a cheat-like hunting system. Every single time I take down a creature, there's a solid chance I'll bag some random stat points, boosting my power, swiftness, or endurance. By this point, my physical conditioning completely wrecks any average guy. I can't exactly tear a tiger to shreds with my bare hands just yet, but no regular wild beast can lay a finger on me either. That's my ultimate edge in this crazy, unstable world. Standing beside the elderly village chief, Zhao Tian, I watched an endless line of troops and bureaucrats head our way from the mountain pass. There were way more of them than usual. The chief stroked his short, snow-white beard and filled me in. Great Qian had just scored a massive win, crushing over 10 cities up north in Li, and taking hundreds of thousands of captives. 90% of them were women. So this time around, every guy in the village would get his pick. The chief's son, Zhao, a massive, dark-skinned thug who always tries to outdo me, was already calling dibs on 2 wide-hipped wives. I just smirked at him. Ernio had begged me to take him hunting before winter hits, since his folks are running dangerously low on food. I told him not to sweat it. Bring the guys along in a couple of days, and I'll make sure everyone comes back loaded. Just then, the head constable rolled in, tall, high and mighty, resting his hand on his sword. He didn't bother wasting breath on small talk. He straight up announced the prefect's decree. Every single man in Liang Province, aged 18 to 40, has got to report to the garrison at the district capital. You've got 1 month. Anyone who dodges it gets executed. So that's the catch. They hand us wives, and in exchange, we go war. The constable told the crowd to quiet down, and laid out the terms. Any bachelor who hasn't married yet can choose up to 2 women, along with 2 stones of grain and 2 taels of silver. But that cash is just relocation money. We have exactly 1 month to show up at the garrison, over in the district capital. If we don't present ourselves, the wives get stripped away, or else we lose our heads. Chief Zhao gave his son the very first pick. Naturally, that big brute snatched up 2 robust, broad-hipped gals, the exact kind prized around here, for bearing kids and weathering tough times. One after another, the local men made their selections. By my turn, only about 40 or 50 women remained, mostly the frail, skinny ones nobody wanted. Right then, the system pinged inside my mind. For every partner chosen, gain 1 random stat point. My eyes instantly lit up. Usually, I've got to slaughter dozens of beasts, just to scrape together a few points. And most hunts don't yield a thing. But now, just 1 wife means a guaranteed point? Talk about a total godsend. I asked the official if I could skip the cash payout and take extra women instead. He gave me a skeptical look, clearly doubting my scrawny frame could manage. He has no clue that I'm actually deceptively lean, slender in clothes, but pure muscle underneath. I claimed I wanted to secure some heirs before marching off to the front lines, which sold him. He told me I could choose up to 5, but that was the limit. Scanning the rows, I picked out 3 women straight away. They all appeared ordinary and disheveled, yet I could tell they were intentionally masking their looks, on purpose. The tall girl on the right had flattened her chest and wore baggy clothes to hide her figure. Her eyes were striking and intense, though she kept her gaze down to avoid attention. The other 2 were slender with delicate features. Even smeared with mud, their beauty shone through. Then 2 more women voluntarily stepped forward. They addressed me as their husband and declared they'd gladly come with me. Their gaze was gentle, overflowing with devotion. I relented and took them along too. 5 ladies, translating to 5 attribute points. But then the officer cut me off. He claimed I could claim the other 4, except for the tall one, the girl named Xiao Jingji. I caught the sleazy look in his eyes. He wanted her all for himself. Shaking, Jingji insisted she wanted to stay with me. The officer threatened to dump her at the army outpost, to be a camp follower if she kept talking back. Her 2 sisters, Jingwei and Jingshu, fell to their knees, begging me to rescue her. Jingji pulled them back up, weeping, telling them to forget her and just survive. The officer ordered his boys to drag her off. I couldn't just stand by. I chimed in, saying I wanted to cut a deal. He scoffed and asked what a backwoods hunter could possibly offer. I countered with 2 pickles of grain. When he smirked at that, I clenched my jaw and bumped the bid to 5 taels of silver, my entire life savings, which could feed a household of 4 for 3 months. That piqued his interest. Grinning, he remarked that I must really dig this chick if I was ready to blow my whole stash. I replied that I simply hated to see the sisters ripped apart. The officer chuckled and laid down his price. 10 taels of silver. I pleaded with him to lower it, but he wouldn't budge. So, biting my lip, I leaned down and pulled out 10 taels of scrap silver, tucked away inside my trouser leg. That was absolutely everything I had. He pocketed the cash, smirked while wishing me a happy marriage, and headed off with his crew toward the next village. Old Village. Chief Zhao stomped his foot and called me an idiot, saying, a girl as skinny as a rail wasn't worth 10 taels. I just chuckled and replied, you can't put a price tag on what you want. Then I shouted for my 5 wives to follow me home. Behind my back, I could hear Xiao De burning with envy, grumbling about how I'd never managed to feed 5 women. The chief quietly pointed out that once I joined the army, 5 beautiful wives left home alone would only spell trouble. By that time, he'd also seen right through Jinji's disguise, recognizing her as a lady from a wealthy, noble family. Back at my place, I settled into my bamboo chair and told the 5 of them to go clean up at the well. The 2 women who had volunteered went over immediately without a second thought, but the 3 sisters just stood there. Jinji thanked me for rescuing her and promised she'd repay the 10 taels in the future. That kind of ticked me off. I told her she didn't have a dime to pay me back with and reminded her to call me husband, like she was supposed to. Her younger sister, Jinwei, tugged her sleeve and said, I was a decent guy, and that without me, she really would have wound up as a camp whore. The other sister, Jingshu, said their old home in Northernly was gone, so they should just accept their new reality. Jinji let out a sigh, apologized, and finally called me husband. I told them to whip up some food, mentioning there was cured meat and coarse rice in the kitchen. Their stomachs were growling so loudly that I could hear them right from my chair. Once the 5 of them returned from cleaning up, I honestly couldn't believe my eyes. Every single one of them was gorgeous. Jinji, though, was an absolute knockout. Tall, elegant, with features straight out of a painting, and dark hair flowing all the way down her waist. Those deep, soulful, autumn water eyes of hers still held a lingering trace of defiance. As it turned out, Jinwei and Jinshu were twins, right around 18, sporting delicate little faces radiant with youthful vibe. The remaining pair, Lu Ener and Liang Shuer, were total stunners with incredible curves. They were the type to turn heads, even completely barefaced. I had them form a line to introduce themselves. Ener went first, stating she was 22, distinguished by a beauty mark right near her lip. Next up was Shuer, 21, radiating a very playful, flirtatious charm. Jinji merely muttered her name and age, 23, her tone completely flat and icy. Jinhua scrambled to explain that her sister was right on the verge of marriage, back in Northernly before getting captured, so she hadn't really processed things yet. Hearing that, I got up, pulled Jinji tightly by the waist, forced her chin upward, and kissed her passionately. She fought back, but I held on tight until she was left gasping for breath. Her face flushed a vivid crimson, and tears began welling up in her eyes. I bluntly told her that past engagement meant nothing to me. From this moment on, I was her man. She snapped back that even if I claimed her body, I would never possess her heart. I countered that I had 0 use for her heart. I just needed her to secure the Wang family lineage. 10 taels of silver was way too hefty a price to let go to waste. Little Jean Yuehua quickly wrapped her arms around mine and sweetly promised that both she and Jean Shu would do me some good. I gave her nose a little tap and said that she and her sister had the most sense. Later that evening, the sunset turned the whole sky crimson, and the entire village was practically bursting with hype. Every house that had scored a wife was throwing a party. I set up 2 tables out in my small walled courtyard, stocking them with some basic grub and booze. Lee Erniu was the first to arrive, bringing along a few of the younger lads. Little Lou brought over a pair of grass carps. Gozi carted in 2 jugs of spirits, and Zhang Dashan rocked up, grinning wide with a couple of old hens his mom sent over. They wished me plenty of sons, real brothers, the whole lot of them. Then a little girl with pigtails, Tion Niyat, came skipping right through the gate looking for treats. Emotion hill, and passed her a pack of honey candies I'd saved. Her folks walked in right after her. My third Uncle Wong and his wife. We aren't actually related by blood, but they've treated me like their own boy ever since. Their 2 sons passed away at a young age. They're only in their 40s, but they easily look 60. That's just what a brutal life does to folks out here. Third uncle couldn't wrap his head around me actually taking 5 wives. He instantly got stressed about how I'd feed 6 mouths. Regular families only marry 1 woman, and even the village chief's house only dared to take 2. I told him not to sweat it. I could handle 5, heck, even 10. He just shook his head and said if things got too rough, I could always sell off a few. I just laughed it off. I escorted him in third, and inside to the main room, to take the head seats, then went off to get my brides. The moment I nudged open the west room door, the 5 girls were gathered around a wooden table, each wearing a totally different look. Jean seemed completely resigned to her fate. Meanwhile, the twins, Jean Wei and Jean Shu, were blushing with pure girlish bashfulness. Enro and Shu Shu sported confident, subtle grins on their faces, staring right at me with bold, hopeful eyes. Look, I'm not a bad-looking guy, I'll admit. Standing 6'2" with a solid build. I've got sharp features mixed with a bit of charm. Matchmakers used to harass me all the time, but they only ever brought around hefty. Brawny farm girls, definitely not my vibe. And that's exactly why I'd stayed single until now. Jean Wei grabbed a piece of red cloth from the table and draped it over Jean Yi's head to serve as a bridal veil. Then, she and Jean Shu covered one another, while Enro and Shu Shu did the exact same thing. Honestly, the veils were just red fabric squares I'd cut up myself. I couldn't afford a single real wedding gown. I did consider buying proper red dresses for all 5 of them, but with less than 10 taels of silver left to my name, doing that would have completely cleared out our pantry. Plus, they desperately needed everyday clothes too. They literally only had the tattered rags on their backs. My women were going to eat proper meals, and wear decent clothes. That much I solemnly promised. I handed them a long red cord to hold onto together, and we made our way into the main hall, where third uncle and his wife sat waiting for us. Little Yu stood up front to act as our master of ceremonies, bellowing out the vows in his most solemn voice. First, bow to heaven and earth. Second, bow to your elders. Third, husband and wives, bow to each other. Now, off to the bridal chamber you go. Just like that, with a couple of bows and a strip of red cloth. I officially married 5 women in a single night. I sent my 5 new brides to rest in the bridal suite, while I headed back out to knock some back with the guys. When they first stepped inside and saw the bed, they must have been completely thrown off. I'd put together this massive brick platform bed, big enough to fit 10 people, I gotta admit. I was clearly thinking ahead while partying outside. Turns out, the ladies were actually bonding, from what I gathered later on. Jinji finally came around. The other girls managed to talk some sense into her. Enro pointed out that I dropped a small fortune to bail her out from the local sheriff and asked her how she thought this would play out. If she kept giving me the cold shoulder, would she rather get sold to a brothel or some other family? Jinji confessed she'd been acting ungrateful and finally dropped her stubborn attitude. Enro and Sure admitted they used to be courtesans at the governor's estate. Down in Kinga, just performers, not highborn ladies. They ranked themselves below the 3 sisters in status. Since Jinji came from a respectable background and was still pure, Jinji took it graciously and said they were all sisters now. They were in this together and needed to back each other up. They all agreed that Jinji should be the lead wife. Meanwhile, I spent the whole night drinking with Aaron, Yeo, and the crew until I was pretty buzzed. When I finally stumbled back into the bedroom, late that night, all 5 of them were perched on the bed, with their bridal veils still on. I poured a couple of drinks and approached Jinji first. I lifted her veil with a wine cup and told her that since she was the oldest, she'd be my primary wife. She blushed dynamic red and called me shameless. Yet she accepted the glass and shared the marriage drink with me. Next, I uncovered the other 4 girls one by one. As 4 lovely, glowing faces gazed up at me. I extinguished the red candle, guided Jinji down onto the mattress, and kissed her before she could object. Through the dark, I promised to treat her right. She shut her eyes with tears rolling down her face, and pleaded for me to be kind. I didn't open my eyes until late the next morning. Glancing over at the sheets, I noticed 3 crimson stains on the bed. It meant 3 of the sisters had been virgins. Enro and Sure, I'd already assumed, knew their way around given where they came from. And honestly, I didn't care. I sat right there on the bedside, feeling pretty damn pleased with myself. 5 bridal nights wrapped into one. Not bad at all, but then the real world hit me again. This setup of sharing a massive, cozy bed with 5 gorgeous wives was only going to last for a month, and after that, I'd have to sign in at the military base. I cleared my head, slipped on my boots, and stepped out. The moment I left the room, Jinshu was out sweeping the courtyard. I caught her by the waist and planted a kiss on her cheek. She blushed deeply and avoided my gaze. Before I could mess with her any further, Enro and Sure stepped out of the kitchen, holding platters of food. I asked where Jinji and Jinwi had gotten to. Jinshu replied that they had headed down to the creek to do laundry. I sent Jinshu off to bring them back, insisting that we all share breakfast like a proper family. Sure brought up that our supplies were getting low. I told them not to sweat it. I'd take them all to town later for some grain, and score each of them 2 sets of fresh clothes. My ladies weren't going to walk around in rags anymore, and Sure completely beamed at that. While washing my face, I pulled up the system panel in my mind. The wedding night had seriously paid off. 2 bonus points in strength, 2 in stamina, and 1 in agility. Then I figured out something even better. Every single time I sleep with one of my wives, there's a shot at scoring a random attribute point. So the wilder my love life gets, the more powerful I actually become. Right now, my stamina, strength, and speed are already several times that of an average guy. I could easily handle a dozen grown men solo. Then, village chief Xiao rocked up to my gate with his son, Xiaoda, climbing. He needed to register all my wives for the official county records. I tried to just give him the names myself, but Xiaoda insisted the women had to show up in person. That pig was totally just looking for an excuse to gawk at them. I warned him to keep his eyes to himself, or I'd scoop them right out of his skull. The chief clocked his son and snapped at him to shut up. Just then, Jinji and the twins came strolling back from the creek. Once Xiaoda caught sight of Jinji's face, fully cleaned up now, his jaw hit the floor and drool literally spilled down his chin. The chief kicked him right in the rear and chewed him out for acting like he'd never laid eyes on a woman before. I stepped out in front of the gate, arms crossed, completely blocking Zhao Da's view. Even old Chief Zhao was visibly stunned. He muttered that Jinji looked like an angel, like they just stepped right out of a painting. I called my 5 wives over to me and had them give their names and birthdays for the official registry. Once they finished, the village chief told me I was a lucky man. I grinned and mentioned his new daughters-in-law were great, with broad hips, guaranteed to give him a chunky grandson. He flinched at that. Turns out, those 2 hefty women Zhao picked eat like pigs, and were already bleeding the family's grain supply dry. As I walked away, Zhao kept sneaking glances back at my yard. The chief kicked him again and snapped at him that, no matter how much he stared, those were still my women, not his. After Zhodan and his old man left, little Yuer came rushing into my courtyard. He'd been squatting down by the river nearby and caught every single word of their chat. Turns out Zhodan was already plotting. He figured that once I deployed with the army, I'd probably end up dead on the battlefield, and then he and his father could claim my 5 wives for themselves. The old chief told him to hold his horses and be patient, but he didn't exactly shoot the idea down. Zhaoda's uncle works as a clerk at the county office, and he'd already pulled some serious strings to keep Zhaoda from getting drafted. They were even whispering about having me deployed straight to Ungshi district, where the Chong barbarians had smashed through the Western Pass. Basically a guaranteed death sentence. I kept my expression stone cold while the boys, Yuer, Ernio, and Guzzi, crouched in my yard, waiting for my orders. Ernio wanted us to disguise ourselves as bandits and raid the Xiao household this very night. I shut that plan down immediately. Xiao Da's uncle has some pull at the county seat, so if the chief and his boy end up dynamic, the law would track it right back to us. With the power I have now, taking down a dozen guards is no problem, but an actual troop of soldiers would totally wreck me. I told you to keep tabs on Zhaoda, right? The second that prick heads up the mountain, I need a heads up. I told Goa to gather a crew to help me put up a solid wall around my property. If Shoyuta thinks he can just creep on my place, I'll make damn sure he pays a painful price. Right after that, I told the guys I was taking my wives to the city. That afternoon, Aaron Yo mentioned needing provisions, and your lady had been badgering him for new threads. So they tagged along with their own wives as well. When I broke the news to my 5 ladies about the trip, Jinji hesitated a bit, pointing out that 5 stunning women traveling in a pack would turn too many heads and bring drama. I told her to relax. I'm tight with the guard captain over in Greenstone Town. Plus, these fists of mine aren't just decorative. Ever since last night, Jinji had changed. She looked even more gorgeous, honestly. She had this warm, mature radiance about her now. She'd stopped dwelling on what happened before and was looking out for my best interests. I promised all 5 of them a whole tael of silver, each to blow on whatever, be it fine dresses, fancy shoes, you name it. Since I wed them, I was going to keep them well-fed and styled right. They all bowed and gave their thanks. And Shwe looked ready to dive right into my arms on the spot. Later that afternoon, we packed up Ernie's ox cart and made our way to Greenstone Town. It's a modest little place, but it's got it all. A grain merchant, a local butcher, a tailor, a textile shop, a cobbler, and even a makeup boutique. I want to pick up grain with Ernie and Yuer, while the ladies hit up the fabric store, led by Ernie and Yuer's wives. The shopkeeper practically broke his neck, rushing over to the front door when he spotted 5 stunning women approaching. A crowd like that guaranteed a huge payout, even dressed in basic hemp garments. Jinji carried herself like straight-up royalty. The guy could clearly tell they were no average village girls. Over at the textile shop, Jinji selected some white cotton and gray hemp material, which was plenty to make 2 outfits apiece. She negotiated the prices, like an absolute seasoned pro, crunching the numbers and sorting out the tailoring. After locking in a pickup date, the twins snagged matching fabrics. Then, Jinshu pointed down at her beat-up shoes, where her toes were literally poking out, and mentioned she desperately needed a new pair. Jinji tallied up the remaining silver I had handed over to them, and declared there was enough cash for 2 pairs of shoes each. Ernie and Yuer's wives were totally green with envy. Yuer's wife complained that her hubby only gave her a measly 300 coins. Ernie's wife added that if her man had half my hustle, she would gladly burn incense to thank the gods. Jinji flashed a warm smile and offered to treat both of them to some new shoes, to say thanks for being such great tour guides. Their faces instantly lit up with excitement. My first wife already knew exactly how to win people over, while the ladies were busy shopping. Trouble was brewing. 5 wasted thugs at a pub had clocked my wives, strolling past. Their boss was a massive dude with a bushy beard, and his crew had a bald guy, a stubby fat one, a lanky brute, and a young punk with a scarred face. They'd been hitting on local women around the area for a while, and now they'd locked eyes on mine. They assumed from the basic outfits that these ladies belonged to some broke peasant who couldn't stand up for them. By the time the women finished shoe shopping and made it to the bridge at the town's west end, the 5 drunks had tracked them down. The short, chubby one strutted over and blew his foul, boozy breath right in their faces. The bald guy told my wives to spend the night with them if they wanted to get back home safe and sound. Jinshu tried to warn them that her husband was on his way. She wasn't lying. I was already gaining on the drunks from behind with Ernie, while Yuer steered the ox cart out of the area. I'd spotted these 5 stalking my women from a distance. I walked right up to the punk with the scar, blocking the bridge, and gave it to him straight. Get lost or die. He whipped out a dagger from behind his back and flipped it around, trying to act tough. Ernie cracked his knuckles and bragged that we'd smash their teeth in. The big guy mocked us, calling us little boys. I ordered Ernie and Yuer to take the wives and the wagon across the bridge ahead of me. I'd sort this out alone. But Scarface stepped right in front of the cart, completely blocking anyone from passing. That did it. I lunged forward and buried my fist right into his stomach. A single blow made him fold up like a lawn chair, his face turning purple as he hit the dirt. The bushy beard gang stared in absolute shock when I leveled Scarface with just 1 punch. As it turned out, he was actually the toughest of the 5. That shut them up real quick. I yelled to Aaron, "Get my wives out of here and head on." Jinji paused right on the bridge and shouted for me to come along with them. I just smirked and booted that short, piss-drunk fat guy so hard he flew a good 8 meters. Little Yuer assured the women they shouldn't worry, since he'd seen me take on 8 guys alone and win. The women found that hard to buy, though Jinji and the others silently recalled just how much stamina I displayed on our wedding night. So, maybe it wasn't such a stretch after all. Ario noted that the real reason I wanted them gone was so I could cut loose without holding back. I just didn't want my wives witnessing what came next. That sold them on it. They trailed behind the ox cart toward the village. A moment later, a blood-curdling shriek rang out behind them. leaving all 5 women pale as ghosts. Walking along, Ernio's wife and Yuer's wife kept telling my wives how incredibly lucky they were. They mentioned I was the most eligible bachelor in 10 villages, good-looking, an expert hunter, and totally open-handed with money. They cautioned the girls to keep me on a short leash, since widows and single girls were constantly buzzing around. Meanwhile, by the bridge, all 5 drunks were wrecked on the ground, perched on a stone post. I asked if they'd finally had enough. Their leader pleaded for mercy, clutching his dislocated arm, while the tall one knelt there with both arms broken. And the bald guy's nose was completely pancaked, with blood masking his face. Only Scarface held his ground, hurling insults at me. So I demanded, who came up with the bright idea to stalk my women? Total silence. I scooped up the dagger from the dirt and began advancing toward their boss. That cracked them. The lanky guy spilled it. It was the short, chubby dude's plan. No sense wasting words. I marched right over to the fat guy, and with one clean swipe of the edge, I emasculated him. He squealed like a stuck pig. Tossing the blade aside, I warned the rest that for today, I was just making an example of the instigator. Next time I caught any of them pulling a stunt like this, they'd all get the exact same treatment. I strolled off into the sunset without a backward glance. Behind me, the fat guy's agonizing shrieks echoed, while his buddies just stood there, completely paralyzed. The tall guy finally clocked who I was. Wong Hu from Anal Village, muttering that no wonder I possessed such brutal power. Their leader ordered everyone to keep their mouths shut about the whole ordeal. Even Scarface, despite his tough guy act, cursed the fat bastard, saying he had it coming from messing with the village women. Meanwhile, Jin Shu was the first to spot me, emerging from the shadows completely unscathed. Told you so, he bragged to my wives, boasting that those drunkards never stood a snowball's chance. Jinji sprinted over, scanning me up and down, searching for any cuts. Seeing that I was untouched, the sheer panic instantly vanished from her eyes. Grabbing her hands, I flashed a smile. Out of all my 5 wives, Jinji is my absolute favorite, the most gorgeous and by far the sharpest, which is precisely why I had to give her a tough time initially. Enro demanded to know what became of the 5 thugs. I gave it to them straight. Their ringleader lost his package and snapped the arms of the remaining 4. Yeah, right. She was stressed about legal trouble, but I told her not to sweat it. The local captain is a decent guy, and those punks would just end up locked up. If word got out, they'd keep their mouths shut anyway. Plus, since I'm heading off to the army soon, no magistrate would care to penalize me over some street brawl. I walked home escorting Jean, holding her hand on one side and her shoes on the other. The 6 of us marched proudly past the ox cart. Ernio and Yor goggled at us with pure envy, right until their wives yanked them by their ears and demanded to know what they were gawking at. At the entrance, I unloaded 5 bags of grain. I threw 200-pound sacks onto my shoulders at once, acting like it was a breeze. Then I went back and hauled the remaining 3 in one go, 2 over my shoulder and 1 tucked under my arm. Jean Weiss watched in utter disbelief and remarked that my might was unreal. Ener flashed me a suggestive look and hinted that the ladies ought to examine my physique a bit closer. Afterward, Jeanhua blushed and said it was far too scandalous. Jinji and the other sisters didn't know how to cook yet, so Ener and Sure whipped up a basic rice porridge with some greens. They mentioned they usually skip the evening meal, but knew I required plenty of food to keep my stamina up. That night, I paid a visit to each of my wives again. By the time I finally returned to Jinji, she caressed my face under the moonlight and told me to save my energy. Little did she know, I just scored 2 more tribute points, 1 for power and 1 for endurance, bringing my stats up to 20 and 21, making me 4 times more powerful than average guy. Yeah, sleeping after that was totally out of the question. So I pinned her down again, and we went at it for another round, until she was completely wiped out. I ended up crashing until right around noon. By then, the whole yard was absolutely buzzing. Goa and his boys were putting up a solid brick wall all around my place, while my 3 sisters-in-law had already rolled up their sleeves to pitch in. They were mixing mud and hauling stones on the far side of the lot. Meanwhile, Ener and Shur were busy whipping up lunch, and the savory scent of meat kept wafting out of the kitchen. Jin Shu rushed over to the well to fetch me some wash water, staring at me with nothing but total adoration. She mentioned that Goa and the guys have been hyping me up all morning long, telling everyone how I once choked out a 60-pound mountain wolf with just one hand. Taking the damp rag she handed me, I gave my face a good scrub. Jinhua instantly called BS on the stories, claiming that taking down a tiger would be impossible, even for dozens of grown men. I told her to just hold on. Just wait. because one day I'd bring a tiger home to prove it to her. Honestly, with my stats leveling up by the day, bagging a tiger wasn't even far-fetched anymore. The real kicker was actually tracking one down. Through all my years tracking game in the Green Bull Mountains, I had never once crossed paths with a tiger. Even so, the village elders claimed they'd heard them roaring. Deep in the wilderness, about 30 miles out. By midday, the heat was getting pretty brutal. Once everyone finished eating and cooled off with some nice, well-chilled watermelon, I sent Goa's crew back home to take a breather until the afternoon. Later on, Jinji approached me, looking a bit hesitant. She asked if she and the other girls could learn the silkworm trade from Ernio's wife. I told her why not. And that's when she brought up the real issue, stressing out over finances. With my military deployment coming up fast, we were down to just 5 bags of grain. Fall was right around the corner, meaning the silkworms would freeze. And none of the ladies had a clue how to hunt or farm. How were they supposed to survive the winter? I reassured her I'd stock up on grain before taking off and head out on a few mountain hunting trips to build up supplies. Then she inquired about who would run the place. Once I was gone, I caught on to what she was doing. She wanted me to officially declare her the matriarch, so the rest would fall in line and prevent any petty bickering. Pretty sharp, so I announced that Jinji would call the shots on everything at home. While I was deployed, Enro and Sure was totally fine with it right away. The twins didn't have a problem with it either, since she's their older sister. Genua then brought up that Jouda had been hanging around our gate, yet again creeping on her chest. That did it. It was time to handle him. My chance finally came 5 days later. Yor had been keeping tabs on Jouda, just like I asked, and he tipped me off that Jouda's crew had headed up into the mountains. I rounded up Ernio, Gawa, Wer, and a couple of others. Ernio was fuming because he found out Jouda had pulled some shady strings to dodge the draft. If the rest of us enlisted and Jouda stayed behind, he'd end up bullying the entire village. I told the guys to keep a cool head. No bloodshed, since we all come from the same place. We tailed Jouda's posse from a safe distance, staying out of sight about 30 paces back. Jouda's guys were having zero luck all day, scrapping by with just 3 rabbits and 2 pheasants. Annoyed, he chose to press on, beyond the 20-mile safety zone, venturing further into the peaks, where local elders claimed tigers lurked. His crew was terrified, but he intimidated them into tagging along. Pausing, I pulled up my system interface. Following 5 days of intense grind with my wives, my attributes had skyrocketed. Strength hit 25, a whopping 5 times an average guy's. Stamina stood at 22, and agility at 20. With stats like these, a single strike from me packed 3,000 pounds of power. Plenty to drop an ox in one shot. Honestly, my rapid growth rate blew my mind. Getting hitched to 5 wives was easily the absolute best move I'd ever made. Raking in stat points was way effortless this way. Compared to hunting, man, if I'd only known, I would have tied the knot years ago. We tracked Jouda deeper into the wilderness. The guys were totally on edge about the tigers, but Arneo insisted that with me there, we had zero to worry about. I just smirked. Truth be told, I was actually hoping we'd cross paths with one. Given my current power, I was locked and loaded. We traveled 30 miles deep into the Green Bull Mountains, when a deafening tiger roar reverberated through the woods. Arneo and the rest froze up instantly. Judging by the sound, it was still a few miles away, so I ordered them to retreat to the 20-mile safety mark, while I advanced alone. If the beast proved too much for me, having them around would only rack up the body count. I dashed swiftly through the thick brush. Just a few hundred meters ahead, shrieks rang out, mingled with fierce snarling. Right then, 3 of Zhao Da's trackers came bursting out from the tree line, scared completely pale. I snatched one guy and demanded to know what went down. He could barely speak. He said the tiger had already slaughtered a few men and was currently hunting Jouda down. I ordered them to run back and alert the village elder, then unsheathed my dagger, gripped my trident tight, and rushed straight toward the roaring. I stumbled upon the slaughter site. First thing I saw were 4 mutilated corpses on the ground. Tang Xiaolong was still hanging on, but barely. The beast had ripped him practically in 2. With his guts spilling out, he begged me to save his life. But there was absolutely nothing to be done. He passed away with his eyes wide open, paralyzed by terror. I shut his eyelids and swore I'd get payback for him. Pressing forward, I finally spotted Jouda, cornered against a massive tree trunk, quivering from head to toe. He was clutching his hunting spear like a mere toy. The tiger was freaking massive, easily 8 feet from nose to tail, with fresh blood dripping from its maw. Its golden eyes were fixed on Jouda like he was just a snack. Jouda was crying that his flesh tasted too foul to eat. Suddenly, The tiger sprang forward and clamped its massive jaws right around both of Zhao Da's legs. Right then, I made my move. I had scaled a sturdy overhead branch, drawing my heavy 8-stone composite bow to its absolute limit. Letting the arrow fly, I intentionally targeted the creature's back leg. Rather than aiming for a lethal blow, agonized, the beast clamped down even tighter, snapping clean through both of Zhao Da's limbs. Right at the thigh. Honestly, that was the plan all along. Legless, Zhao Da would remain a cripple for the rest of his days, never again posing a danger to my wives or anyone else. Besides, keeping him breathing served a better purpose than letting him kick the bucket. A deceased son of the village chief would only trigger an official probe. Yet a mangled survivor under my protection means ultimate loyalty and a lethal end. Zhao Da let out a shriek as the beast tried to bolt with his torn-off legs. I grabbed my spear and launched it with every bit of my strength. It pierced right through the predator's thick neck. The creature let out a final whimper, staggered a few paces, and collapsed to the dirt. Zhao Da stared up at me with profound appreciation, uttered his thanks, and blacked out from the bleeding. I bound up his wounds to keep him breathing, then stepped over to the fading tiger. The spear had practically gone all the way through its throat. It was a goner, so I yanked the weapon free. Blood spurted out, and the cat went stiff. Guess crossing paths with me was just about the worst luck you could have, buddy. The beast was heavy as hell, but I hauled the carcass back to where Zhao Da lay, completely out cold, and put together a rough litter using vines and limbs, securing his legless torso onto it. Roughly 10 miles out, I crossed paths with Yuer and the elder, Chief Zhao, who was actively searching for his boy. Putting on my finest, devastated expression, I told him I hadn't made it in time. The poor chief broke down, convinced that Zhao Dao was a goner. Right then, Zhao Da whimpered from the litter, still kicking. But when the old man spotted the raw stumps, where his boy's lower limbs used to be, he completely lost it all over again. I urged him to get Zhao Da to the regional medic pronto, before he drained dry. Zhao wiped his eyes, declaring that his kin was forever in my debt. I replied that even though Zhao Da and I hadn't always seen eye to eye, we share the same roots. I'd never just leave a neighbor to die. The elder was visibly cut to the heart. I could see the guilt eating at him for whatever plots turn he and Zhao Da had been plotting. Regarding my ladies after they split, I brought the lads back to grab the tiger. Once they caught sight of the massive beast, they were totally stunned. Yuer remarked, I'd strike it rich. Just the pelt alone can score 100 taels of silver, and the meat and bones would rake in plenty more. I gave them my usual line. As long as I'm eating steaks, they'll get the broth. That really got them moving. They lashed the 400-pound monster to thick logs using vines, and began dragging it away. I told them to head on out, saying I wanted to bag a couple of rabbits and pheasants for my wives. But that was total BS. My actual motive for lingering was noticing someone lurking in the thickets close by. Once the boys cleared out, I called out for whoever was hiding to show themselves. Suddenly, a blade whipped out from the brush, aiming straight for my throat. I dodged back and deflected it with my dagger. Piece of cake. The assailant turned out to be a teenage girl, maybe 16 or 17 years old. A woman's voice yelled out, telling the girl to freeze. I took a proper look at the pair. 2 women decked out in Chong tribal gear, leather boots, head coverings, and curved sabers. The older woman looked ghostly pale and clearly hurt, with blood soaking right through her shirt. She claimed to be Princess Nalan Chi, of the Nalan tribe, one of the 4 major Chong clans, and pleaded with me to help them. Before I could even decline, a squad of tribal troops burst through the foliage. White Wolf tribe fighters tracking down the princess. Their captain hemmed the 3 of us in, with over a dozen soldiers. The princess ordered them to let me walk. I had absolutely nothing to do with this. The commander just laughed and replied, they grabbed the 2 women and execute me on the spot. To those guys, folks from Great Shin, were nothing but sheep lined up for slaughter. You want to capture people? Phoenix. I argued, but why the hell kill me? They cracked up even harder, and the chief said, the Shin people were just livestock to them, to be butchered whenever they felt like it. Well, in that case, I said, I'll just have to wipe all of you out instead. Before he could even blink, I drove my trident straight through the closest soldier's chest. The tribal commander shrieked for his men to put me down. A dozen warriors lunged at me. All at once, I chuckled, yanked my trident free, and hurled it so hard it pinned a guy right to a tree trunk. The girl, Meng Yin, just stared in sheer shock. She realized that if I hadn't gone easy on her earlier, she'd already be a corpse. I drew my short blade and got to work. My speed was like lightning. I carved through them one after another. 2 over here, 3 over there. Princess Nalan ordered Meng Yin to stop shielding her. and back me up instead. The girl charged into the fray with her scimitar. Within moments, only 3 enemies were left on their feet, including the leader. He was shaking like a leaf. Every bit of his arrogance had vanished. I finished off the remaining 2 soldiers, then approached him with my dripping knife and grinned. He screamed some threat about killing me and rushed forward. I slipped outside his reach, sliced his throat in one clean sweep, and watched him collapse. Nail and Cher thanked me for saving their lives. I asked where they had crossed into the mountains, and if there were more troops on the way. She replied that they had escaped from the steppes, with nobody chasing us anymore. No way that tribal army would cross 1,000 miles of rugged peaks. Good enough. I told them they were free to split, then knelt down to rifle through the dead commander's gear. For any loot, all I found was some pink undergarment. Disgusted, I just tossed it aside. Right then, the princess produced a gold disc, about the size of a kid's palm, and held it out to me, offering it if I'd guide them out of the mountains. I locked eyes on it for a second, weighing whether to just snatch it and bolt. She raised the stakes, saying if I got her out alive, the Nalan tribe would owe me a lifelong debt. And the moment she made it back to the grasslands, she'd send me 10,000 pieces of gold. I took the medallion. It weighed 10 taels easily. At Didisum, between that tiger and this gold, I'd hit the jackpot in a single day. By dusk, I'd gotten them to the edge of the range. I told them to lay low, while I went to grab some local women's clothes, so they could blend right in. Mungyo was stressing over the princess's gashed chest, but Cher insisted she could tough it out one more night. I gave my word to take them to town for medical help. Come morning, then booked it down to my place. You 2 caught sight of me first and hollered. Jinwei and Jinxiu came sprinting straight into my arms. I flashed a pair of wild pheasants bagged on the way down, and the girls practically wept with joy. Yinad on Shuat? Shuer were waiting at the gate, beaming warmly, as I promised to treat everyone to a town trip tomorrow. Jinji stepped out last, putting on a pout. She muttered that if anything had happened to me, the 5 of them wouldn't even know how to get by. I pulled her close into a hug and buried my face in her hair. She chewed me out right in front of everyone, but I could tell she wasn't actually pissed. Then, I low-key slid the gold disc into her hand. Her eyes went totally wide, but she just stashed it in her sleeve without a word. I muttered that I needed 2 sets of female clothes, and for her to follow me up the hill. I promised to explain tonight, and she didn't question it. Honestly, that's what I love about Jinji. The more time we spend together, the more I realize just how special she is. She has total faith in me. Out in the yard, that tiger carcass was still just sitting there, right where the guys had dropped it. They asked what the plan was for it. I said we'd drag it to town tomorrow and cash in on it, splitting the profits among everyone who pitched in. The guys hyped that up. Once they took off for the night, I brought Jinji along up the hill, to where the 2 Chone women were laying low. We brought them back down to my place. Yenner spotted me walking in, carrying a passed-out woman on my back, accompanied by an exhausted girl holding a scimitar, and demanded to know who they were. I told her I stumbled across them in the mountains, and ordered the gate locked. Jinji laid Nail and Cher on the bed, and started dressing her injury. The twins went to grab some warm water, while I sent Yenner and Shirshir out front to keep an eye out for any company. Meng Ying dropped straight to her knees, begging me to save her princess. I told her to get up, ensuring her the princess would make it. I instructed everyone to drop the princess title, and just call her Lan Cher from now on. I trusted my wives implicitly, so I didn't hide who she really was. But just as Jinji was about to strip off the blood-soaked undergarments from Chia, she politely asked me to step out. I stole one final glance at Shiner's gorgeous face, and dragged myself outside. Out in the courtyard, Yenner teased me for getting dumped out. So I scooped her up, plopped onto my bamboo chair with her on my lap, and gave her rear and 2 playful swacks. Blushing, she called me hubby, in that completely mesmerizing voice of hers. I carried her straight off to the west room for the night. The next morning, I had the guys get 3 ox carts ready. One for the dead tiger, one for the injured Cher resting on a mattress, and a final one for gear. Ernio asked who the 2 unfamiliar women were. I told him I found them up in the hills, to serve as maids for my wives. He just shook his head in total awe and remarked that only I could manage house maids in Anal Village. We made our way toward Greenstone Town. By the time we hit the bridge, a massive crowd had already gathered. The news had spread overnight. The village chief had rushed through town yesterday, carting his legless son along, and the tale of my tiger hunt had made it to every single hamlet. Within 10 miles, folks crowded around the wagon, just to catch a glimpse of the huge beast. They couldn't believe a single man pulled it off alone. They gossiped about how a neighboring village once lost a dozen men taking down just one tiger, yet I had bagged this one all by myself. Women in the crowd shot me some pretty flirty glances, hailing me as the tiger-slaying champ and the absolute best hunter in Qingpin County. One lady even shouted out, asking if I'd take a sixth wife. My 5 wives walked right behind the carts, veiled in white. Jin Shu was completely amazed by how popular I was. Jin Wan tilted her head up proudly, soaking in the envious looks from the other women. Sure remarked. That tying the knot with me was pure, absolute luck. Inner mentioned she'd rather live this modest life with me than go back to all her past extravagance. Jinji remained quiet, simply scrubbing my back, with eyes radiating a growing tenderness. Just as we made it to the town square, guards began parting the packed crowd. Captain Wong of the patrol was heading right our way. Noticing Captain Wong, Zhang walking up to us, I moved forward and offered a respectful bow. To my surprise, he mentioned knowing my old man, Wang Shan, and suggested we treat each other as uncle and nephew. I jumped at the chance. Having an in with a local official, even a minor one, was worth a fortune in silver. He was thrilled about it, too, claiming a nephew famous for taking down a tiger would definitely boost his standing around the county. I asked if he could assist in selling the beast. He told me not to worry and promised the cash by nightfall. Without a second thought, I handed over the cart. Jinji softly whispered, asking if I feared getting ripped off. I told her there was no way. The entire town witnessed me hauling the tiger in, so he wouldn't risk his reputation over this. Besides, we were basically family now. I sent Aaron Yo and Dashin over to the grain merchant, then guided you were, and the ladies toward the south side, right where the medical clinic was located. I brought Cheer inside, and the elderly physician took one glance at her infected arrow wound, and noted we arrived just in the nick of time. A mere half-day later, and she'd have been a goner. He required a full week to treat her properly. Meng Yin hung back to keep an eye on her. As we strolled out of the clinic, I straight up told Jinji how stressed I was about sheltering a Chong princess right in our backyard. She caught my drift immediately and brought up what Cheer herself had pointed out. No tribal army could ever cross 1,000 miles of rugged peaks. Plus, the Green Bull Mountains had endless pathways. There was no way they'd track her to our tiny hamlet. She wasn't wrong. I gave her a quick peck on the cheek right there in public. She huffed and stomped, but she couldn't stay mad. I announced to my wives that we were going on a massive shopping spree. Heavy winter blankets, cozy clothes, and tons of pork. They were thrilled. Later that evening, Uncle Wong returned from the county capital, lugging a heavy pouch filled with 200 taels of official silver. My jaw completely dropped. He mentioned that a wealthy gentleman named Liu was throwing a big 60th birthday bash and paid top dollar to buy the entire tiger. I offered a straight 50-50 split right on the spot. He turned it down, acting all insulted by the gesture, so I compromised 20 taels for him and 10 taels apiece for his 4 deputies. He tried to argue, but I put my foot down. If he wouldn't accept that modest token, I wouldn't take a single coin of the 200. He finally pocketed 30 taels and signaled his crew to express their thanks. They offered grateful bows. 10 taels basically equaled a whole year of their pay. Once Uncle Wong took off, I was left with 130 taels, adding that to the golden medallion from the princess. I had gone from dead broke to the wealthiest man in a Nell village in a mere 2 days. I then passed out 15 taels of silver to each of the lads. Aaron Yeo. There was Gua, Daxing, and another guy, which was plenty for any of their households to get by on for a whole year. They were absolutely thrilled. Ernie mentioned he could finally hold his head high at home. Someone even bit the silver to ensure it was legit. Goa nearly broke down. His folks are the hardest up in our crew. His dad is crippled and his mom is stuck in bed. They basically live on charity from the rest of us. Once the crowd split, I pulled Goa to the side and attempted to slip him an extra 10 taels. He turned it down, claiming I'd done way too much already. I literally had to threaten him, forcing the silver directly into his palms, then crammed 5 pounds of pork into his hands and booted him out the front door. Before he could argue any further, Jean Shu caught the whole exchange and called me a decent man. I told her to drop that kind of talk. I bolted the gate, and I my 5 wives with high hopes. Since those 2 annoying third wheels weren't around tonight, maybe we could all share the master bed again. Jinsi blushed and told me no way. I'd be sleeping by myself in the west room tonight. Then Jean Shu and Jean Wei bashfully confessed that it was that time of the month for both of them. I turned to Yenner and Xiaoxiao with a pleading look. They smirked and said they were good to go. So those 2 kept me company for the night. 2 weeks zipped by, and one morning after breakfast, I was gearing up to go to town to see how Chi was healing when Ernie came sprinting up to my gate, totally drenched in sweat and out of breath. The authorities had rolled into the village again, Not to distribute wives this time, but to command us to report to the county outpost tomorrow. They had slashed our 1-month grace period right in half. Out of nowhere, Ernio questioned why, only to get smacked right across the face. I headed over to the village square. Some horse-faced officer was calling out names from a list, belling out that every man who had been given a wife had to report to the county barracks by tomorrow morning. No exceptions. Anyone failing to show up would face execution as a deserter. A guy in his 30s spoke up in protest, arguing that he hadn't even gotten his wife pregnant yet. The officer barked at him to shut his mouth, unless he wanted to be dealt with as a deserter. You and the other boys crowded around me, looking dead serious. I told them to keep their cool. I'd be right there alongside them. Then I stepped up and asked the officer what we needed to bring. He replied, just a bit of silver for rations on the road. If we made the cut for the frontline infantry, we'd be issued weapons and uniforms. But if we only qualified for the logistics crew, we'd have to supply our own gear, bedding, and funds. See, support troops were treated like absolute slaves, hardly fed and barely clothed. The locals started whispering among themselves. Some argued, frontline fighters at least get proper gear and decent meals. But you could easily get killed in battle. Logistics guys had a better shot at surviving, but they lived a dog's life. Others reckoned it all depended on where you were deployed. If they sent you straight to the front, nothing else mattered. I just took it all in quietly. The day I'd been dreading had finally come. Once the officials moved on, I told the dozen or so young men remaining to head back home, say their goodbyes, and gather at the village gates by daybreak. You asked me if I wanted to fight on the front lines. I'm in for logistics, Ernio proclaimed. As for me, I'm definitely going frontline. He boasted. With my talent, I'll easily make general one day. Gwa. This plainly stated that whatever I picked, he'd tag along too. I headed back solo. The ladies were still in the dark. When Yahello spotted me back so early, I told her to round up all 5 wives right away. They came rushing up from the creek, toting their laundry baskets. Jinji stood behind my seat, massaging my temples, as I gave it to them straight. I was shipping out to the county camp tomorrow morning. The room went dead silent. Jinji's expression fell. In barely half a month, we'd built a real life together, and now it was getting torn apart. I'd hoped for a couple more weeks to bond, maybe get someone expecting, and keep racking up attribute points. But all of that was shot now. I reassured them with what they needed to hear. The rations and winter stocks were set. If word ever reached them that I fell in combat, they were entirely free to move on and remarry. Jinji gripped my hands tightly, promising they would wait for my return. Sure burst into tears, sobbing that if I died, she wouldn't want to live either. Yenner shut that talk down fast, insisting I'd return as a general and elevate them all to noble wives. Gina puffed up her cheeks and nodded along. I asked them to whip up a proper send-off feast, then pulled all 5 of them into a massive embrace. Yenner brought up the situation with cheer. I noted that her injury would take a few months to mend, after which she could stay or leave as she pleased. I had far bigger fish to fry now, surviving a massive clash of thousands of soldiers. Individual power only gets you so far. Making it through the military requires more than raw brawn. That evening, we shared our final meal, and afterwards, the 6 of us piled into the massive bed one last time. Every single one of my wives gave herself to me completely. Even Jinji threw away her usual modesty and initiated things herself. Come morning, I'd racked up 2 more attribute points. My strength hit 29, nearly 6 times that of an average guy. Stamina was at 25, agility at 22, a straight-up superhuman physique. Only my intellect and luck were lagging behind, especially luck, which sat at a measly 2 points. Honestly, I had no clue what it even did. I slipped out of bed before the sun came up. 5 pairs along. Pale legs were all intertwined across the bedding. They were all still fast asleep. Utterly exhausted, I paused by the doorway for one final glance. Farewell, my wives. As it turned out later, they were actually all awake. Jin's shoe held tightly onto Jinji's neck, murmuring that I was officially gone. Jinji, still glowing from the night before, softly assured her that I'd return. Inner just stared blankly at the ceiling, wondering when that day would come. Down at the entrance of the village, the local lads had already assembled beneath the willow tree. Ernio smirked when he spotted me approaching, with my rucksack and short blade. I didn't bother wasting breath on speeches. I simply gestured with my hand and barked a single word, move. 15 of us, the toughest young guys from Anel village, set off on foot toward Qingpin County. Covering those 30 miles took us roughly 4 hours. The moment we arrived at the western gate, dozens of guards loomed, with officers managing the traffic flow, while a trooper yelled out that all military draftees should queue up by the wall to sign in. Turns out we weren't even entering town. Right at the gateway, a guard processed us. The line moved pretty fast. Just write your name or leave a thumbprint. Right as I grabbed the brush to ink mine, a pair of officials approached the check-in desk. The receptionist scrambled to his feet. One of the newcomers, a pale, dapper fellow wearing administrative robes, locked his eyes on my name and asked if I was that tiger-slaying champ from Anal Village. I told him I was. That's when he introduced himself. Zhao Xian, the deputy county magistrate and regional leader, who happened to be Zhao Tian's little brother and Zhao Da's uncle. I nearly choked on the spot. Word was this guy used to be a basic office clerk. Yet now, he ranked as the second most powerful man in Qingpin. Seems my tiger kill had done wonders for him, too. When the head magistrate discovered the legendary Beast Slayer hailed from his assistant's hometown, he bumped Zhao Xian up the ladder right then and there. I guess I was the Xiao family's good luck charm. He acted real chummy, telling me to call him Uncle Xiao, and thanked me for keeping Xiao alive. Putting on the most earnest face I could muster, I said, Xiao and I were basically brothers, so saving him was a no-brainer. Right behind me, Erniu and Nyo were, biting their lips to keep from busting out laughing. The commander of the county militia, Li Ziyong, was also standing nearby. He checked me out with real respect and remarked that any young guy who could take down a tiger solo had a massive future waiting for him in the military. Zhao Xian low-key asked Li Ziyong to keep an eye on our local boys. Li Shirong nodded, saying consider it done. The young clerk behind the desk, Li Zhun, seemed pretty impressed too. He told me to take a breather in the shade and wait for the escort to take us to camp. Just before we took off, I caught him tipping off the squad leader, a stocky guy called Chin Fong, that the Chong cavalry had already raided deep into our Nanan district. Plus, Anchi district out west was getting completely ripped apart. Things were way worse than I thought. Chin Fong ordered us to line up in 4 columns. His second in command, a dark-complexioned soldier named Chinergo, booted anyone who wasn't standing perfectly straight. We marched roughly 5 miles northeast to a military base with its gates wide open. Night had already fallen by the time we made it. Chin Fong decided our gear would be handed out tomorrow and crashed us out right on the training field. Just a massive, open patch of weedy dirt. One big recruit grumbled about sleeping on the bare ground. Chun Urga shot him a glare that shut him up instantly. He warned us that anyone caught slipping out of camp would be executed right then and there as a deserter, then made us yell that we understood twice. Before he was satisfied, once the soldiers cleared out, we all collapsed onto the dirt. Ewer unwrapped his pack and pulled out a couple of yellow corn cakes. Ernio brought along some dark steamed buns and 2 portions of pickled veggies. And that was dinner. Cold food on the rough ground, right under the stars on our very first night as soldiers. That opening night on the drill field was brutal. By mid-September, the weather had turned freezing, leaving half the guys shivering and sneezing when they woke up. Right at daybreak, Shun Urga started bashing a copper gong, till the whole crowd stood up. Morning grub was just a bowl of watery congee, a pair of coarse grain rolls, and some pickled veggie slices. No one whined, though, cause for country folks. Any food's good food. Post-meal, we formed lines out on the grounds to wait. That's when County Captain Li Xiong rolled up with his squad leaders. Skip the speeches, skip the pleasantries. He just straight up told us to pick a side. Frontline fighters to the left. Supply units over on the right. You, and the guys all glanced at me. I stepped to the left without a second thought. And every last one of my brothers followed. There's you, Erniu, Gao, Hu, and Dashin, maybe 8 or 9 of us total. Only 4 or 5 older folks from back home opted for rear support. The combat guys each scored a proper spear and a real military uniform. Support troops got a cheap, flimsy pike and a hemp shirt. The gap in gear quality was pretty obvious. Then Li Xiong dropped the real bombshell. Once our 3 days of training here wrap up, we aren't heading out to Nanan District, like everyone figured we would. Instead, we're being deployed to Anchi District, the western front where the Chong cavalry has already broken through the mountain pass and is currently tearing up the countryside. The whole field went wild. Men were yelling that this was a total death sentence. Nobody here has actual combat training. Those Chong horsemen are brutal killers. And since the western pass has fallen, there's nowhere left for us to hide. Li Xiong's face completely hardened. He roared at everyone to shut up. You think the court feeds you grain for nothing? Free silver and ladies for the taking. If you value your lives, bust your asses training for the next 3 days. You won't be dropped straight onto the front lines. I'm sending you along a secure route to the district capital, where you'll keep drilling until you're combat ready. That managed to ease the tension a bit. He put squad leader Chin Fong in charge of our drilling and took off. Chin Fong immediately dumped the workload onto Chun Ergu. and cleared out with the other squad leaders. For 3 straight days, Urga drilled us from dawn till dusk, practicing circular defensive rings, square offensive formations, and basic spear work. By the 3rd morning, when Li Zian returned for inspection, nearly 400 of us could actually move in organized units. He seemed pretty pleased. Qin Fong snapped to attention and reported 386 recruits. All accounted for, Li Xian ordered him to march us to Anchi, the district capital, within a week. Urga barked for everyone to grab their gear and fall into the camp gates. The men roared back in unison. For the very first time, we actually sounded like real soldiers. As the crowd dispersed, Qin Fong called my name and told me to stick around, after the others cleared out. Once we were alone, Qin Fong pulled me aside and quietly asked if I wanted to stay behind in the county. He mentioned that he and Captain Li could pull some strings, meaning I wouldn't have to head to Anchi. Il looked overota. Go, and the guys heading toward the gates, packs slung over their shoulders, and told him no dice. I was going to Anchi. He warned me it was total chaos out there, with Chong horsemen raiding all over the place. I told him my mind was completely made up. He slapped my shoulder and said I had some real guts. The guys asked what that was all about. I mentioned to him that the chief just needed me to keep you knuckleheads in check during the trek. You muttered that we weren't running away. Right at the camp entrance, Deputy Magistrate Xiao Xian warned Qin Fong to keep a close eye on his local kin. Captain Li Xiong looked dead serious once we set off. Word reached me later that the 2 bosses were discussing just how grim the situation had gotten. Xingping County had barely 30,000 families remaining, and under a fifth of the menfolk were fit to fight. The governor was merely sending a few thousand green recruits over to Wanxi, pretty much acting like he'd given up on the place. Li Xiong had a hunch. The governor was keeping the elite border troops for himself, instead of taking the Chong head-on. Following 6 days of brutal marching, we hit the Anchi district capital, and the view completely blew me away. The ramparts were constructed entirely of brick and stone, towering over 60 feet in the air, a massive stronghold. It was nothing like the puny walls back in Xingping County. Even so, every single one of the 4 gates was locked down tight. The surrounding pathways were totally deserted. The defenses were loaded with weaponry, and troops were glaring straight down at us. Chunfeng directed us toward the eastern entrance. His directive stated that was our sole option for entry. So we hurried along the base of the fortification, while the guards kept a sharp lookout from above. Then, roughly 300 meters out from the eastern gate, some Chong riders emerged, dozens of horsemen, charging right out from a northern tree line. They flew straight at us, carrying severed human heads that swung from ropes tied to their saddles. Chun Feng swore loudly and barked for everyone to get their pikes up and lock into a defensive ring. According to him, we got lucky since it was just a few dozen riders. A bigger army would have completely wiped us out right then and there. Still, even a minor Chong cavalry squad was terrifying. A single horseman could take on 3 to 5 of our guys. No squit. Plus, our 50 seasoned troops hadn't actually experienced any real combat yet. He grabbed a massive shield and a long pike, taking his position right at the front of the line, staring down the charging cavalry head-on. Right behind me, you could hear him whimpering in fear. Arneo clutched his spear, trying to act all tough. But he couldn't even look those riders in the eye. I watched the horsemen close the distance, their curved blades glinting in the sunshine, hooves making the ground vibrate. I yelled at everyone to hold their ground. If we could just survive the initial onslaught, we could retaliate. Personally, I wasn't scared. I'd already taken out over a dozen Chong troops, with my bare hands back in the mountains. Sure, being on horseback made them look meaner, but they still only had 1 head apiece, just like me. Qin Feng let out a roaring battle cry as the riders slammed down upon us. The Chong centurion spearheaded the assault himself, shouting orders to slaughter every single one of us. He crashed into our wall of spears at full speed, slashing his curved sword left and right, butchering several men in an instant. His cavalry followed, right in his wake, horses plowing violently into bodies, spears snapping like brittle twigs, and blood spraying everywhere. A few of the riders got unseated too, but the casualties on our end were brutal. Shun Feng skewered a rider with his pike and barked at everyone to tighten the formation, to keep the cavalry pinned inside our perimeter. The centurion didn't give a damn about being hemmed in. He could easily tell we were just a bunch of rookies, and began gathering his troops to break through, so they could wheel around for another strike. Chun Feng realized that if they slipped away, the whole thing would become an absolute massacre. Chun Ergu lunged directly at the centurion, weapon in hand, but the centurion sharply pulled back on his reins. The mount reared high, and with a single heavy slash, he sliced right through Urgu's spear. The horse came plunging straight down at him, just as the centurion brought his blade up to finish him off. Smirking like some sort of demon. Right then, I made my move, leaping straight off the dirt. I vaulted through the air and thrust my spear deep into the center of the commander's chest. The blade pierced straight through his back. He stared down at the wound, completely shocked, before tumbling right off his mount, dead before he even hit the dirt. Urgu just gaped at me, trembling as he choked out his thanks. I told him to skip the gratitude. We still had about 40 horsemen left to handle. Even so, taking out their captain completely broke them, losing the centurion threw the cavalry into a total panic. One soldier shrieked that the boss was dead and tried to bolt. Chun Feng seized the chance and bellowed that anyone taking down a Chong horseman would pocket 5 taels of silver. 3 confirmed kills meant a promotion to corporal, while 6 would make you sergeant. That really got everyone's adrenaline going. I spearheaded the charge with Urgu and the crew through the fray, knocking riders off their mounts one after another. With my blade, the shrieking was relentless on both sides. By the time it wrapped up, over 30 Chong soldiers lay dead across the field. Barely a dozen of them managed to flee, but we'd also lost around 70 or 80 of our own, either slain or severely mangled. It was pretty grim. Chun Feng then ordered us to gather our casualties and take the enemy's heads for proof and bolt for the town gates. He was terrified of enemy backups arriving. A green lieutenant up on the wall called us out. Chun Feng bellowed out our unit details from Qingping County, Nannan District, and threw out the countersign. The heavy gates burst open and we flooded right in. Barely a few minutes after our last guy made it inside, the ground started rattling. Thousands of Chong horsemen came pouring across the northern plains, surging toward the east gate like a dark tide. Urga doubled over, wheezing and gasped. Man, if we'd been just a hair slower, we'd be total history outside those walls. Chun Feng looked over at me and noted that the whole clash rested on my single spear strike. Without that, 90% of us would have been wiped out. I told him it took the whole crew to pull it off. The young lieutenant made his way down from the wall to give his name. He'd caught the entire skirmish from above and was seriously blown away. He never figured a few hundred green boots could not only weather a heavy cavalry charge, but actually slaughter most of the raiders. He directed Chun Feng to guide us to the north camp, where the district governor would station us. Once the backup forces from other counties checked in, his attitude was full of respect, a bit of civility we'd paid for in blood. Past the gates, the streets were jam-packed with displaced folk. Crude shelters were propped up against every wall, crowded with women and young ones, just staring blankly into space. Urgu spat curses at those Chong horsemen, while Ernio swore we'd boot every single last one of them straight out of Liang province. The young lieutenant, who turned out to be named Lu Junbai, kept pace beside me and asked what I went by. When I mentioned it, he grinned and remarked that the nickname fit me, totally fierce like a tiger. But then, he abruptly ground to a halt up ahead. This hefty officer by the name of Zhao Meng was giving a hard time to a lady in a white gown and veil, who had set up a food stall to help out refugees. Zhao Meng claimed that the town's commander had just put out a decree banning any independent charity work, so he made his troops wreck the entire setup and drive the displaced folks away. The lady turned out to be Lu Zhongbai's little sister, Lu Rushua, and she insisted she'd never heard of any such rule. Right then, it clicked to the young guard, who let us pass the checkpoint, was actually her sibling. Lu Zhongbai stepped up to look Zhao Meng in the eye, calling bullshit on the order. Zhao Meng just smirked. His uncle happened to be the regional military chief, basically the biggest boss in Angxi. He didn't even try to hide that he was actually just completely obsessed with Lu Rushua. He'd been eyeing her for a long time, and was purely using this to stir up trouble. Since Zhongbai wouldn't just hand his sister over, Zhao Meng commanded his dozen soldiers to jump him. A brutal fight broke out. Zhongbai put up a massive fight, but Zhao Meng was way more powerful. A level 4 blood chi martial artist, going up against Zhongbai's level 3 tier 1 bone forging skill. One brutal blow sent Zhongbai crashing hard to the dirt, spitting blood from severely ruptured internal organs. He couldn't even stand up. Zhao Meng gloated and strutted over to Rushua, bragging that once he took what he wanted, the Lu family would be forced to capitulate and agree to a marriage arrangement. She recoiled in absolute terror, screaming that he had no right to do this. He grabbed for her veil, claiming he wanted to see if Anchi's top-tier beauty actually matched the hype. She tripped backward right over a bench, but I was already springing into action. I managed to catch her before she hit the floor, wrapping one arm around her waist. Opening her eyes, she found my face just inches from hers. Her cheeks turned bright red, and she couldn't even look straight at me. She offered a soft thank you, while Zhou Ming absolutely lost it, demanded to know where this dirt-poor country peasant had suddenly crawled out from. Chen Feng intervened, bowing politely to explain that we were just fresh conscript from Qingping County. He was trying to play it neutral, since both Zhao Ming and Zhang were captains, who each commanded 1,000 men, way above our pay grade. Zhao Ming barked at us to beat it, but I was still holding on to Ru Shua. I just couldn't keep my mouth shut. Sir, I called out loud enough for the whole crowd to hear. Harassing a lady in broad daylight doesn't really look all that proper. Now, does it? Zhuo Ming glared at me like he wanted to rip me apart, asking who the hell I thought I was. I told him coolly that I was merely a new rookie, who happened to take down a Chong centurion. He laughed right in my face, scoffing that there was no way some greenhorn soldier could defeat a seasoned, battle-hardened cavalry commander. I corrected him. Not just the centurion, 13 other horsemen as well. Just moments ago outside the east gate, he whirled toward Zhang Bai, pressing him to confirm if this was actually true. Zhang Bai grinned through his bloodied lip and replied that was the exact reason he'd left his post, to personally guide us back to the camp. Zhou Ming remained skeptical. So, Chen Feng nodded to our guys to bring out the proof. 34 decapitated Chong heads, one by one. That turned the tide. The displaced crowds packing the street went wild. Folks cheered frantically and wept for lost parents, hailing us as total heroes. A few young guys declared they wanted to sign up right then and there. The mob began pressing toward us. Zhou Ming noticed the crowd getting rowdy and realized that pushing any further would trigger a massive riot. He snarled at Yung Bei, saying he got lucky today, then stormed off with his crew. Right then it hit me that I was still holding Ru Shua by the waist. She softly whispered, asking if I could let go now. I offered an apology and let her go, though honestly, I wasn't sorry in the slightest. Yung Bei formally expressed his gratitude for saving his sister. He promised to personally report the clash to the district governor to ensure we all receive the recognition we earned. Next, he passed his token of command to a guard named Lu Eru, ordering him to escort us to the north camp, while he took Ru Shua back home. Before departing, Ru Shua cast one final glance back at me. I kept watching them leave until Chen Feng nudged me and told me to quit daydreaming. At the north camp, the guards at the gate were skeptical at first, but once they spotted the heads in Aaron Yosef's hands, their jaws dropped. They quickly waved us inside. Within the hour, word of our exploit had spread everywhere. Thousands of troops, both rookies and veterans, swarmed the training grounds, just to gawk at the pile of 34 heads. The rumor mill was spinning fast, apparently. Another batch of 500 greenhorns had pulled in just the day before and got blindsided by a similar Chong patrol. They lost over half their head count, and barely 200 actually made it inside the gates, stacked up against them. How we held our own was pretty much miraculous. The deputy camp commander, Zhang Yuan Shan, came sprinting straight over. He stared down at the severed heads and pressed Shun Feng on whether it was legit. Once Shun Feng gave him the nod, he barked out "Excellent" 3 times straight. He demanded a complete after-action report draft pronto. Qin Feng confessed that he was illiterate. Yung chuckled and countered that dictation was fine, since the base kept clerks on hand. He gave his word that the brief would reach the regional governor and the chief commander by tonight, telling us to sit tight for our bounties. We stood locked at attention on that drill ground. 300 of us, back straight, caked in grime and blood, while every last soldier in the garrison watched us with sheer respect. It was a damn good feeling. 34 heads, rated at 5 taels apiece, meant 170 silver taels, yet far beyond the cash. We had made a point. We weren't just simple backwater peasants anymore. Later that night, around the fire, Shun Feng laid out the grim casualty list. We had taken down more than 30 Chong horsemen, but we lost 13 seasoned fighters and 39 fresh recruits. Roughly a dozen more were severely mangled. Go sat slumped right there with a bound shoulder, looking pale. Ergo rested his blade flat across his lap and conceded that the Chong cavalry were absolute terrors. I broke it down plainly. Foot soldiers taking on cavalry are always at a major disadvantage. Plus, we were all totally green. The fact that we actually pulled off a win was wild. Xin Feng mentioned that by Imperial Army standards, taking down a Chong centurion bagged you 100 taels of silver and a promotion to squad leader, 8th rank. He assured me the gig was mine. The next morning, the whole campus gathered out on the training grounds. The district governor, chin waning, showed up alongside the garrison commander, Zhao Shang. The governor called for Chun Feng and me to step forward. He sized me up and asked if I was really the guy who'd killed the White Wolf Centurion with just a single spear thrust. I told him I was. He gave a satisfied nod and declared the reward: 100 taels and the rank of squad leader. Right then, Zhao Ming stepped out of line and objected. He said there was no way a rookie recruit could take out a third-rank warrior. He demanded proof. Zhang Bai immediately spoke up, swearing he'd seen the whole thing from the wall. But Commander Zhao Shang, Zhao Ming's uncle, smoothly interjected that Zhang Bai might have been mistaken. Amid the chaos, he proposed a straightforward test. Let me square off against Zhao Ming. If I won, my claim would be proven. Zhang Bai pulled me aside and warned me to pass on it. Zhao Ming was a fourth-rank blood chi martial artist, way tougher than the centurion I'd finished off. He told me I stood no chance. I thanked him for looking out, then turned back to the governor and said I was down for the challenge. Zhao Ming laughed and said if I could just survive 10 of his strikes, he'd give me the win. I looked him dead in the eye and told him I'd drop him in 3. Unsheathing his long saber, he lunged forward, slashing straight at my throat. Way too slow. I dodged to the side, instantly reappearing 2 meters behind him. Whirling around, he aimed a fierce swing at my waist. Still snail-paced, I effortlessly stepped back. The onlookers began tracking the strikes. 2 swings, and both missed by a mile. Zhao Ming was starting to lose his cool. He bellowed at me to quit dodging and face him like a man. With a smirk, I replied, fine. Stamping the ground, I propelled myself high into the air and brought my spear down like a massive sledgehammer, aiming dead at his skull. He threw up his blade to parry. Steel slammed into steel, with a deafening clang that echoed across the entire training grounds. The force of the blow was so brutal that it sent Zhao Ming reeling backward for over a dozen paces. Thousands of soldiers stared on, completely dumbfounded. Zhao Ming's hands were trembling violently. He could barely grip his weapon anymore. Gazing at me, he gasped, "You've got to be a 5th-rank blood ignition martial artist." I honestly had no clue what he meant by that. Noticing that I lacked any signs of chi energy, he demanded to know if I possessed innate superhuman strength. I eagerly jumped on that excuse right away. 10,000 gene of natural-born power, the ultimate camouflage for my system. He then pressed to know how I could be so incredibly fast. Shrugging, I told him I'd spent years sprinting against wolves and leopards out in the wild mountains. Just then, a voice shouted from the crowd, revealing I was the legendary tiger-slaying champion of Qingping County. Zhao Ming's countenance completely changed. Experienced hunters were highly valued in the Liang Province Army. They were formidable, sharp-eyed, and resilient. Suddenly, it all clicked for him. Even so, his ego wouldn't let him back down. With a fierce roar, he charged at me like a human cannonball, thrusting his blade right at my chest. I parried hard with a sweep of my spear, disarming him completely in one swift motion. Then I drove my boot dead center in his chest, sending him flying backward. He skidded 10 meters out, eating dirt. Before he could even recover, I was standing over him, my spear tip hovering inches away from his throat. Gritting his teeth, he finally tapped out and conceded. The entire grounds erupted as thousands of troops cheered, roaring about how they'd never seen a raw recruit take down a captain. I turned toward the dais to go claim my prize. Suddenly, a shout from behind, "Die!" On pure instinct, I whirled around and drove my spear back. Without a second thought, the blade sank deep into Zhao Ming's chest. Looking down, I realized he had lunged at me completely unarmed. He did it on purpose, taking the hit intentionally, just so his uncle could frame me for attempted murder. Commander Zhao Shang flew into a rage, branding me a criminal and ordering his guards to lock me up. Governor Qian intervened, cutting them off, insisting it was a clear case of self-defense. As they carried Zhao Ming away, he grinned through blood-stained teeth, muttering that my reward was as good as gone. Right then, I saw right through his ploy. He'd sacrificed his own body just to bait a trap for me. Locking eyes with him, I made a silent vow. One day, I would end his life for real. Zhao Shang pressed the issue hard, protesting that Zhao Ming had been defenseless and that I had deliberately delivered a fatal strike. Zhang Bai spoke up for me, while Shun Feng brought all 300 of our men to their knees to vouch for my character. Governor Qian gave Zhao Shang a quiet warning, not to destroy the morale of the troops. Because of this, Zhao Shang retreated. He'd already secured exactly what he wanted. The governor declared the middle ground. My achievements and screw-ups just wiped each other out. Instead of becoming squad leader, I was bumped down as sergeant. A drop in rank. But hey, I'd still pocket those 100 taels of silver. When asked if I took the deal, I just bowed and agreed. There really wasn't anything left to say. Once the ceremony wrapped up, Zhao Shang made his next play. He proposed deploying Zhang Bai with a 15-man squad to back up Copper Mountain Fort. A legitimate mission, but also a neat trick to boot Zhang Bai out of town and keep him away from his sister. Next, he pushed to send our 300 Qingping troops over to Ningxia Fort to make up for their shortage of men. Governor Qian wavered, seeing as we were all green recruits. But Zhou Shang fired back that we'd already proven our grit outside the walls. Plus Ningxia Fort sat high on a mountain, a breeze to defend and a solid spot to toughen up new guys. The governor bought it just like that. We were getting packed off to the borderlands. Zhao Shang handed down the official deployment. In 3 days' time, Qinfeng and I would march our 300 Qingping soldiers out to reinforce the garrison at Ningxia Fort. Meanwhile, Yung Bei would lead 15 men to Copper Mountain Fort. We'd barely even arrived in the city, and we were already being kicked right back out. It was obvious Zhou Shang wanted us out of the picture and wanted Zhang Bai isolated from his sister. Still, we didn't have the leverage to fight it. Qinfeng and I simply bowed and took our orders. Once the brass had cleared out, Zhang Bai walked over, looking completely gutted. He apologized for dragging us into this mess. Qinfeng then asked what Ningxia Fort was really like. According to Zhang Bai, it was a mountaintop military outpost, situated roughly 30 miles south of the fallen West Mountain Pass. It had previously been a major iron mining hub, garrisoned by 1,000 troops, but output had plummeted, causing the force to be scaled down to just 200 men. He figured the place had already been hit by Chong raiders. Why else would Zhou Shang be dispatching 300 green recruits? To back it up, Qinfeng questioned how we'd even make it. Well, with Chong cavalry swarming all over the place. Zhang Bai and I replied in unison. March under the cover of night, lie low by day. Zhang Bai mentioned his old man wanted to meet me, invited me over to their place. That very night, I agreed. Once he took off, Ewer grumbled that we should have pushed harder to secure my squad leader rank. I reminded him we were complete nobodies here, so landing a sergeant position in 100 taels was already better than we could expect from folks who'd rather see us dead. Qinfeng nodded along, noting that even the governor had to show Commander Zhou proper respect. Erga pointed out we had next to no training and were being dumped at some isolated fort. It was essentially a one-way ticket to the grave. Shaking my head, I replied that getting out of the city was actually a plus. At least out at Ningxia Fort, we wouldn't constantly have to worry about getting a knife in the back from Zhao Shang's lackeys. That cleared the air. Gua declared he'd follow me to the ends of the earth, while Ernyo barked that he'd go through hell if I was out front. Qinfeng made it clear to the whole crew that from here on out, my commands carried just as much weight as his own. Right then, I did something that caught them all off guard. I passed Qinfeng the full sum of my 100 taels, down to the last coin, and told him to split it up among the families of our fallen brothers, and gave it to the severely injured. I didn't keep a single coin. Qinfeng locked eyes with me. Yu hesitated, then tossed his 5 silver pieces onto the pile. Ergu added his 10, counting them out one by one. Every single soldier who had been rewarded that day surrendered their cash. They claimed that by sticking with me, they'd make 100 times more down the road. I gave them my word that they would. Qinfeng swore we'd split everything from here on out, through thick and thin. Something had changed. Before today, we were just a random bunch of local villagers. But now we were turning into a genuine brotherhood, welded together by blood and camaraderie. And everybody knew exactly who was keeping it all together. Not Xinfeng, but me. I was their anchor, while heading back to the tents. I ordered Xinfeng to keep the men strictly inside the camp for the next 3 days. No drama, giving Zhao Shang 0 excuses to target us. He got the message. I also instructed him to drill the logistics crew, right alongside the frontline infantry. Out here, the concept of non-combat troops didn't exist anymore. When the Chong cavalry charged in, they didn't care about your rank before slashing you down. Every man had to know how to handle himself. Qinfeng was completely on board. At dusk, Lu Eru was waiting just outside the gates, with a horse and carriage. The Lu family manor was located in the peaceful western sector of town, a grand, stately residence boasting massive scarlet gates, coming from my own straw shack and wicker fencing. Over in Anal Village, I have to admit, I felt a slight pang of envy. Zhong Bai welcomed me at the entrance like an old pal, telling me to cut out the formal stuff, since he had a few years on me. Guess I'll just address him as Brother Jing Bai. Once I stepped inside the greeting hall, Lu Ruo Shui was already waiting there. She ditched her face veil this time, And man, I almost totally lost my cool. Her face was picture-perfect, fair skin with a rosy glow, delicate pink lips, and those captivating, upturned eyes. Her dark pupils shimmered like polished black jade, submerged in pristine water. Without a speck of makeup, she could easily outshine any top celebrity I could recall from my past life. Her reputation as Ansie's premier beauty was no joke. She gestured for me to sit down and mentioned that her father had trouble walking, but he'd be out in just a moment. I replied that I'd rather just wait on my feet. After all, I'm just a simple guy, totally unworthy of that young master title. Right then, a booming, robust laugh echoed from the courtyard. An imposing, middle-aged man clad in dark robes limped inside with a cane. His right leg was severely compromised. Fierce, intense eyes paired with a rugged jawline. This had to be Luo Qingshan, the head of the clan. He was definitely a veteran fighter back in the day. He expressed his gratitude for saving both of his kids, brushing off my modest attempts to downplay it. Then, he cut straight to the chase and ordered the staff to bring out his presents. Two heavily built guards lugged in an obsidian-colored iron spear that stretched over 10 feet long. Right on their heels were two others, one gripping a polished, deep green longbow, while the other carried a leather quiver, stuffed with dozens of arrows. I was stunned. These pieces were definitely top-tier gear. The weapon was known as the Black Iron Mace Lance, originally belonging to Lu Qingshan's own father. It clocked in at over 100 pounds, meaning an ordinary person couldn't even swing it right, much less use it in combat. Only a master of the 5th rank could tap into its true potential. It's been gathering dust at the Lu estate for 3 decades. They called it the Green Fish Bow. Fully drawn, it could take out a target 800 paces away. It also belonged to his dad. I tried to pass, protesting that the gifts were just too pricey. But Zhangbai wouldn't take no for an answer, claiming his old man wasn't giving them out just to say thanks. Word had gotten out about my freakish natural strength, and he knew I was the only guy around who could actually handle these weapons. Rushwa chimed in as well, adding that her father wanted me to crush our enemies with them. So I gave in. These pieces were priceless, worth a total fortune. The Lu family was backing me, putting a wager on my future. They'd witnessed my skills out on the training grounds, and they wanted me on their side. I got the unspoken deal completely. They hooked me up with gear and clout, and I pay them back with allegiance and solid results down the line. At the end of the day, people only bank on power. I swore to Lu Qingshan that I'd return the favor 100-fold one day. He just smirked and said his family would hold me to that. We finally dug into dinner, and the booze was flowing. The 4 of us were laughing and catching up, deep into the night. By the time we wrapped up, I was completely passed out on the table, totally wasted. Zhangbai had the staff carry me over to a guest room. Ru Shui had already slipped away to her own room a while back. Smart girl. The next morning at the Lu Manor, Zhangbai showed me how the Black Iron Lance breaks down into 2 separate parts. The bottom half unscrews, so it can slide right into my back quiver, which leaves the main shaft at roughly 6 feet. Assembled, the whole weapon stretches over 9 feet long, dark as night with an 8-sided tip, about 2 feet long, built to pierce right through scale and chain armor. It was love at first sight when I grabbed it. I headed back to camp holding the lance with one hand, the green fish bow slung over my back, and a leather quiver packed with 30 arrows. The guys swarmed me the minute I rolled in, staring blankly at the weapon. Ergen knew what it was right away, and called me a total greenhorn for not recognizing a proper lance mace. Shun Feng strolled over and remarked that my trip to the Lu estate had definitely hit the jackpot. Once breakfast was done, I pulled Shun Feng aside, telling him we needed to bag some more supplies before moving out: bows, arrows, heavy shields, spare spears, and supply wagons. He nodded and mentioned he was already planning a talk with the second-in-command. If they were sending us to die at Ningshan Fort, they could at least give us a fighting chance with decent gear. He returned that night with a massive grin, escorting a train of more than a dozen wagons, 100 bow setups with 30 arrows apiece, 200 spears, 100 full-body shields, and the wagons to boot. The guy secured the whole lot. The other troops around the grounds watched us load up, just shaking their heads in pity for us. Ningshan Fort lay over 100 miles out, right through enemy Chong territory. Everyone figured we were already dead meat. 300 raw, half-trained rookies, heading straight into the wilds. 3 days later, the south gate swung open in the dark. Shun Feng and I guided our 300 troops out of Anshi City. Total silence, save for the rumbling of wagon wheels on the path. We pressed on through the night down the main highway. As day broke, we arrived at a village bordering the woods. I sent you where, and Guohua had to check things out. They returned roughly 30 minutes later, totally pale. The whole place was deserted. Nothing remained except dozens of decomposing bodies, women, elderly folks, and toddlers barely 3 years old. Every single soul was butchered. Yahello was trembling with fury. I told ActionToon that we wouldn't set foot in that village. The crew just choked down dry rations under the tree canopy, kept the horses quiet, shoved the wagons under some brush, and took a breather. I split our guys into 4-guard shifts led by Ergu, Iyar, Gu, W, on Narniu, with each squad pulling a 90-minute watch. Xin Feng just nodded along to my commands without giving me any grief. Technically, he was the boss, but when it came down to it, everyone, him included, listened to me. He didn't care. Honestly, as long as we made it to Ning Shan Fort in one piece. He was perfectly fine letting me call the shots. We planned to wait out the day and hit the road after dark. After 5 grueling days of nighttime marches and daytime hiding, we finally arrived at Ning Shan Fort. The ascending trail was incredibly tight and unforgiving, cluttered with shattered blades and old, dried gore. Obvious proof that the Chong raiders had previously tried to storm the gates and suffered massive losses. The moment the lookout on the rampart caught sight of us, he lost his cool, shrieking about an incoming enemy attack. A massive, dark-skinned man named Wei Ming came charging out of the quarters, spitting curses, and white-knuckling a massive ring-pommel broadsword. A greenhorn officer named Li Jun trailed close behind, followed by a female commander named Bai Yushuang, who had a prominent purple birthmark across half her face, leading a platoon of imposing female warriors. The entire garrison sprang into defensive positions within a matter of minutes. But then the guard finally noticed that we were actually sporting the crimson regalia of the Great Qian Army, rather than Chong tribal armor. Wei Ming booted the sentry's rear for triggering a false alarm. Qin Fong and I headed out toward the stone entrance. He called out our credentials. Qingbing County Nannan District dispatched by Governor Qian, and Commander Zhou to back up the Fort Li Jun, headed down with a quartet of guards to inspect our passes. In Chuanfeng's military token, everything checked out. Wei Ming confirmed the governor's signature. An official stamp himself, then had the gates flung wide. He walked down with a laugh, shook that his endless stream of messages, pleading for backup, had actually paid off. He introduced himself as the fortress commander, military delegate Wei Ming. He insisted we skip the protocols and just call him Boss Wei. The outpost was massive compared to what I'd imagined, carved directly into the cliffside, packed with quarters everywhere. The tight path up meant the enemy forces couldn't flood the gates all at once capturing. A stronghold like this meant either burning through bodies or cutting off provisions to starve us out. By Yushuang sorted out lodgings for all 300 of us silently. Her look remained absolutely freezing the whole time. Wei Ming told us not to take it personally. That was just her usual vibe. She guided Qin Fong and me over to a line of officers' billets, right near the foot of the ridge. Private rooms, one allotted per squad commander. I mentioned that I was merely a sergeant, not a squad leader, so technically I wasn't entitled. Qin Fong cut right in and gave Bai Yushuang the whole scoop on how I'd single-handedly dropped a Chong centurion and 13 horsemen right outside Anqi's walls by martial code. That feat easily should have scored me a squad commander's rank at the very least. Bai Yushuang's icy gaze sized me up thoroughly before she brought up the most glaring question. If taking out a centurion got me a squad leader slot, how'd I end up as a mere sergeant? Shunfeng broke it down for Bai Shuang, explaining I'd been busted down for ticking off a major big shot. Before he could finish, Wei Ming walked up and called it right away. Zhao Shang. Once ActionToon confirmed I'd thrashed and poked Zhao Ming back in the arena, Wei Ming's eyes sparked, and he said I had real balls. Li Jun questioned if I was a 4th-tier martial artist. I just shook my head, given my usual line, that I'm just built different with quick reflexes from years of hunting out in the wild. Wei Ming didn't skip a beat, saying if Zhao Shang wouldn't grant me my squad leader rank, he would. Right then and there, he appointed me as the 4th squad leader of Ningshan Fort. He told me that around here, skills were all that mattered. If I proved I had what it takes, he'd willingly hand over his own job. It was obvious Wei Ming held his own grudge against Zhao Shang. Something about saving the guy's life years back, near the capital of Liang Province, only to get stabbed in the back for it. Bai Yushuang cut in with her cold tone, reminding everyone that the outpost was running out of rations. We relocated to the command hall, which was basically just a massive log cabin facing the entrance. She laid out the grim reality straight. The fort had 307 troops before our arrival, and less than 100 stones of grain. adding our 300 men over 600 mouths to feed, leaving us with barely 2 weeks of food. Plus, 80% of the current garrison were total greenhorns. Just like my own crew, I brought up that while trekking up the mountain, crops and corn down in the fields. Wei Ming shook his head, noting a village some 15 miles out had 300 Chong horsemen stationed there, keeping tabs on the outpost. Anytime someone headed down to forage for food, the cavalry ambushed them. When I asked if it was just 300 riders, Li Jun sneered and retorted that 300 Chong troopers matched 3,000 of our guys, since each fought like 10. He was spot on about us losing a head-on fight. So I pitched a midnight ambush instead. Li Jun shrugged it off as pure daydreaming. Wei Ming agreed that the idea was too dicey, considering most of our troops were total rookies. They'd already lost half their unit, and a couple of squad leaders in an earlier raid, by a mere 1,000 horsemen. If the Chong truly turned up the heat, the fort was done for. I dropped the matter and told him I got it, but I requested a guide from Wei Ming, so I could head down the slopes tomorrow and check out the layout myself. He slapped his knee and put forward by Yushuang, saying she knew every single town around here. She nodded along without showing any emotion. Once Xin Fang and I took off, I later found out Wei Ming asked his 2 lieutenants what they made of me. Li Jun claimed I had guts, but was way too wild, not cut out to lead. Bai Yushuang hesitated before saying, gutsy, shrewd and pretty thick-skinned. Wei Ming chuckled and teased her about crushing on me. She brushed him off and remarked that the food crisis had to be dealt with one way or another. Otherwise, we'd starve to death before the Chong even touched us. The next morning by the gates, Wei Ming glimpsed the dark iron spear in my grip and the green fish bow slung over my back. He was stunned. He instantly knew they were the Luo clan's mythical weapons. He was blown away that Lu Qingshan had actually handed them over. I just grinned and told him the old guy, clearly saw some potential in me worth backing. Wei Ming's face was a mix of pure shock and total envy. Xin Fang then filled Wei Ming in on how I'd landed in hot water. It all kicked off because I'd backed up the Luo siblings, sabotaging Zhou Meng's plot to snatch Rushua. That's exactly why the Luos hooked me up with the gear. Wei Ming nodded. He remarked that it finally made sense of the old man's bounty. I ordered the crew to stay put and keep training. Recon was meant for a tight squad. Bringing a crowd would just blow our cover. Yushuang didn't utter a word. She just grabbed her mount's reins and headed out. Following her lead, we trotted, roughly 3 miles out to the edge of the woods, giving us a clear view of Li family village. That's where those 300 Chong riders had set up camp. The landscape surrounding the settlement was completely flat, ideal for a cavalry charge, but a total nightmare for foot soldiers. Yushuang pointed that out right off the bat, instantly shutting down any hopes for a head-on raid. Still, she wasn't completely writing off the mission. She let me know that the Chong troops got hammered every single night and then retired to their tents with the women they captured. The dead of night, somewhere between 1 o'clock and 2 a.m., would give us the perfect prime time for a stealth strike. The real trick was slipping in completely unnoticed, and the solitary path, offering any concealment, ran straight through the heart of the village. When I asked if she was on board, she replied bluntly, "I've got no desire to starve to death." Valid point. I told her that checking out in a blaze of glory beat starving any day. We hitched our rides to some trees and waited out the twilight. As darkness settled in, I caught a rustling sound in the nearby cornfield. Clutching my spear tightly, I edged forward. Yushuang leaned in close and told me to chill out, guessing they were just locals. Turns out she was right. Around 15 figures emerged from the stalks. Nothing but kids. They were led by a sharp-eyed boy. I quieted them down and asked who they were. The kid said his name was Li Chong'an, 15 years old. He and the other youngsters had holed up in a cellar during the slaughter and slipped away 2 nights ago. They've been roughing it in the cornfields ever since. Every grown man and elder in the village had been butchered. Every single woman had been dragged off. Only these kids made it out purely because the Chong missed their hiding spot. I asked if the cornfield ran continuous all the way into the village. He nodded. Yeah, cut straight through to a small creek bridge right behind the place. Sure, they had sentries posted there, but you could wade across the water to bypass them. Then he dropped something that really caught my attention. The village had more than 1,000 stones of grain stashed underground, and he knew the exact spot. Looking at this scrawny 15-year-old, with pure fury burning in his eyes, he swore he wanted to tear into the Chong soldiers' flesh and drink their blood. They'd murdered his folks and snatched his sister. When I asked if he'd guide us into the village tonight, he didn't blink. I felt a pang of guilt. Honestly, roping a kid into such a dangerous stunt But desperate times call for desperate measures. With Chong'an leading our way through the stalks and slipping us inside, Yu Shuang and I could scope out the enemy camp properly. I told Chong'an to have his buddies lie low in the woods until we got back, and then we'd get everyone safely to Ningxian Fort. Yu Shuang observed the entire interaction blankly, yet I could tell she totally agreed. Audacious, cautious, and thick-skinned, her exact description of me. And right then, she was watching all three play out live. The three of us slipped into the high stalks of corn and made our way toward the settlement. Chang'an guided us through the cornfield, right to the edge of the village. Smart kid. He had even told his buddies to scatter and take cover separately in the woods. Yu Shuang remarked that kids growing up without parents learn how to survive real quick. Roughly 100 meters away from the river, Chang'an pointed out the position of the bridge and where the sentry was posted. I told him to hold tight in the corn. If we didn't make it back within 2 hours, he needed to fall back into the woods. Yu Shuang and I stealthily approached the edge of the water. I could make out 7 or 8 shapes, gathered around a bonfire near the bridge, maybe 30 meters out. So we bided our time. Right around midnight, a heavy cloud masked the moon, plunging everything into pitch blackness. I gave Yu Shuang a nudge and murmured that it was go time. She checked the depth of the water using her spear before gliding right in. The river spanned about 5 or 6 meters, reaching nearly 2 meters deep dead center. Both of us managed to swim across completely undetected. Once on a far bank, I messed up. I glanced over at Yu Shuang. Her drenched clothing hugged every single contour of her body, revealing a figure I hadn't even registered beneath her armor. Putting aside the birthmark on her left cheek, the right profile of her face was stunning, and those frosty, profound eyes only heightened her look. She caught me looking, instantly folding her arms over her chest and snapping at me to turn away. I muttered an apology, but the damage was done. She was livid. She absolutely refused to press on while soaking wet. I suggested she remain concealed by the shoreline, while I went ahead to recon solo. She barked a reply, but let me go, giving me exactly 30 minutes. I sneaked through the pitch-black village, passing rows of mostly abandoned houses. The Chong favored camping out in tents by the entrance, though a single courtyard glowed with firelight. Leaning against the low mud wall, I eavesdropped. A Chong centurion was flogging a guy on the ground, while another guard just stood by watching. They were talking about captives. Close to 100 men packed into that tiny yard. Blacksmiths, carpenters, masons, and artisans plundered from nearby settlements. See, the Chong clans always target 4 things in a raid: women, gold, grain, and metalworkers. Women to bear future soldiers, blacksmiths to craft weaponry. The centurion gave the passed-out guy a kick, then headed off with his buddy, barked orders to 4 guards posted at the gate to keep a sharp eye on the prisoners. If anyone else managed to escape, it'd be their heads. This flipped the script. Nearly 100 expert builders. If I could break them out during an attack, they'd be an invaluable asset for our fortress. I kept pressing on toward the main Chong encampment by the village entrance. I spent hours mapping out the grid where tents were pitched, sentry shifts, the horse stables, and all the pathways in and out. By the dead of night, just before the dawn, I had a clear plan, slipping back down to the riverbank. Yu Shuang caught the sound of my steps and called out a challenge through the darkness. I let her know I'd found some crucial intel, but we had to wade back across first. She gave a groan, having literally just wrung out her gear, yet she followed me right back into the freezing water without uttering another complaint. We made the crossing again. Yu Shuang was visibly annoyed about getting drenched a second time. I filled her in on the vital details I'd gathered. The Chong encampment had incredibly sloppy security, with 0 fortifications protecting their tents, and there was a courtyard in the village, holding nearly 100 captive artisans, mostly blacksmiths. She kept catching me checking her out in those soaked clothes. I won't lie, I definitely was. Chanjin was still waiting out there for us in the cornfield. Good kid. I asked if there was a spot nearby where we could start a fire without getting spotted. He mentioned a hidden shack deep in the woods, then gathered up all the kids and led us right to it. I told Chanjin to grab the dry rations from our mounts. Those kids needed the food way more than we did. He looked like he was about to cry from gratitude. I promised him a proper feast the moment we made it back to Ningxian Fort. Once inside the shack, we built a fire to dry off. That's when I saw something that stopped me dead in my tracks. The glow of the fire illuminated Yu Shuang's face, and that purple birthmark was gone, completely vanished. Beneath, it was honestly one of the most stunning faces I had ever laid eyes on. Perfectly sculpted features and flawless skin. Breathtaking even when compared to my 5 wives. I blurted out how gorgeous she was, and she panicked instantly shielding her cheek with her hand. Then she snatched up her silver spear and shoved the tip straight against my throat. I asked what I'd done wrong, but she just cursed at me, blaming me for everything. She'd been dunked in the river water twice, which totally messed up her body's chi and caused the medicinal paste maintaining her fake birthmark to wash right off. So the whole birthmark deal had just been a disguise. A woman that gorgeous, serving in the army, would just invite endless trouble, which is why she'd been masking her true appearance with some sort of herbal trick. She threatened to end me if I ever breathed a word to anyone. I raised 3 fingers and swore an oath to heaven and earth. This secret stays strictly between us. At last, she put down the spear and ordered me to face the other way so she could dry her clothes by the fire. I caught the sound of rustling fabric behind me. She warned that if I snuck a peek, she'd end me. I boasted right back that I had 5 stunning wives waiting at home, so I had zero reason to look. She just scoffed, muttering that she doubted anyone would ever marry me. I told her she was welcome to drop by my place sometime and check for herself. She snapped back that she'd never set foot in my house. I headed over to the doorway to keep watch. She said she'd sleep for an hour, then we'd swap. I just shrugged and let her crash. She slept straight through her shift, but I didn't wake her. Honestly, she needed the rest way more than me. Noticing her clothes were dry by the fire, I carefully draped them over her, without touching her once. At daybreak, I finally woke her up. She sat up instantly, crossing her arms over her chest, and glaring at me with pure suspicion. I assured her I hadn't tried anything, just covered her with her dry clothes, nothing more. She demanded to know why I hadn't woken her up to take over. I told you, Shuang. I let her sleep because I wasn't even tired. Days of marching through the night had totally reset my internal clock. What I kept to myself was that she talks in her sleep. Tong halu, braised pork elbow, sweet and sour fish. She was dreaming of a whole banquet. All tough and cold on the outside, but turns out, she dreams about treats just like a little girl. She only had 3 pills left for that fake birthmark of hers. Once those were gone, her actual face would be exposed for good. That stressed her out way more than any Chong cavalry could. We brought Chong in and the 15 kids back with us to the fort. I told Yu to get them fed and sort out a place for them to sleep. After that, I went straight to the command hall. The whole team was waiting, so I shared all my intel. The Chong camp's security was total garbage, with 0 barricades or defenses around their tents. Their guards got wasted every night, and down in the village, close to 100 captured smiths and artisans were locked up in a courtyard. On top of that, Chong mentioned there were more than 1,000 she of grain stashed away underground. Li Jun just shook his head, calling it way too risky. The Chong would pack up and leave eventually, and those craftsmen weren't worth the gamble. But when Wei Ming turned to Yu Shuang, she looked right at me and declared, "I'm backing Commander Wang on this. Let's fight." Qin Fong slammed the table, saying he was down. Wei Ming smirked. "That's 4-1. Li Jun sighed, but went along with the majority vote. Then everyone turned to me for the strategy. Honestly, I've been plotting it out since the moment I snuck out of that village. 300 spearmen, led by Yu Shuang and myself, would creep through the cornfields and cross the river into the village under cover of night, flanking their camp from the rear. Meanwhile, Chun Feng and Li Jun would position 100 shield bearers and 100 archers inside the cornfield, right opposite the camp's main entrance. The second our spearmen broke the enemy's lines inside, the shields would seal off the gate, leaving the archers to pick off anyone trying to bolt. Wei Ming greenlit the plan immediately, then demanded to join the frontline raid himself. We were set to move in 2 days. Until then, every last soldier would train nonstop. Losing this fight wasn't an option. If we botched it, our fortress was completely done for. Wei Ming completely shook up the garrison defense structure. 600 troops total. He'd take charge of 200 and divide the remaining 400 evenly between me and Qin Fong. Yu Shuang and Li Jun got 100 men each. Every squad leader was required to choose a second-in-command to attend the leadership briefings back at the base. I asked Aaron Yuer and Goa who wanted the deputy spot. Yuer mentioned he didn't care about rank. He just wanted to back me up. Ernio reckoned Goa was the sharpest and should take it. Goa tried to back out, claiming he was the worst brawler. I cut the chatter and gave the nod to Goa. I gave my word to all 3 that being a deputy was just small potatoes. They were destined for much bigger things. The other squads sorted their deputies in no time. Shun Feng naturally went with Air Gu, while Yu Shuang picked a massive, brutal woman named Sun Dainiu, aka Sun the Beast. Li Jun selected a reliable, seasoned vet known as Old Li. Wei Ming chose a pair of battle-tested troops from the local outpost, Shun Feng and Zhui Dao. 600 troops. 1 chief for squad leaders and 6 deputies. Nangshan Fort finally had a proper structure in place. In a couple of days, we'd see if it actually worked. 3 days down the line, 500 men gathered at the gates, ready to roll out. Wei Ming fired them up. We had the upper hand in numbers. This victory was ours to take, and anyone turning tail or getting cold feet would be dealt with permanently. The troops cheered in response. 2 days of intense practice had made them sharp, and my Qingping crew were absolutely hyped. They had witnessed my combat skills on Qi's ramparts, and I'd spent the last 48 hours hyping up our strategy, until every last one of them believed we'd crush it. Changjin and his buddy Chong. Shan rushed over and pleaded to join the unit. I said no at first since they were only 15, but Chin Phone made a solid point that having neighborhood scouts in the dark would ease the trek. I relented as long as they stuck right by our side, without offering resistance. Chong was set to hit the village with me, while Chongshan steered Chin Feng's ambush crew. We advanced silently under cover of night, 500 men moving like a dark serpent, winding through the pitch black. Wei Ming spearheaded the line in obsidian armor, wielding a massive 80-pound, 7-foot greatsword dubbed the Black Dragon Blade. The rest of us went on foot, and around 1 a.m., we hit the woods just 3 miles outside the village. Wei Ming divided our ranks exactly as planned. 300 pikemen, along with Yushuang, Wei Ming, and myself would slip into town to catch the camp from the rear. Meanwhile, Chun Feng and Li Jun took 200 shield bearers and archers to stake out the cornfield by the camp's main entrance. Once flames erupted from inside, they'd bottle up the gates. Wei Ming handed over total control of the strike force to me. I dispatched Chongshan with Qin Feng's squad to scout out the ideal blind spot, right by the perimeter gate. After that, I guided the 300 troops into the stalks. We reached an open patch about 100 meters from the riverbank and hunkered down. Checking the water clock, it wasn't time yet, but once the hour struck, I ordered the bulk of the unit to stay put. Yushuang and I would venture ahead to take out the bridge sentries first. Yuan and the boys wanted a piece of the action, but Wei Ming shut them down. This was entirely my call. Yu Shuang and I knew this particular terrain like the back of our hands. Peering toward the river, I spotted a pair of guards patrolling the bridge, illuminated by a small campfire burning nearby. I told Yu Shuang I'd swim over to block their escape route, while she stalked along this side of the bank. My opening shot would be the go signal. I stripped straight down to my shorts. No sense in soaking my gear all over again, and slipped into the icy water with my spear, keeping my gear high above the surface. Yu Shuang averted her eyes, muttering a quiet curse. Reaching the far side, I took cover right behind the bridge. A pair of sentries paced back and forth up top, while a big, bearded guy lounged under a tree by the fire, cozy in a stolen cotton quilt. One of his buddies told him to get up and do his job, but he just grumbled and went right back to sleep. I notched 2 arrows onto the green fish bow. Both flew dead on, taking out a guard each. The first took a shaft straight through the chest, and desperately tried to shout a warning, but only managed a wet gurgle before dropping. The second plunged right into the river with a heavy splash. The bearded guy sat up, totally dazed. Before he could even stand, Yu Shuang's arrow pierced his heart from across the riverbank. He mumbled something about enemies and went limp. The bridge was clear. Not a single sound reached the camp. With the 3 bridge sentries dead, Yu Shuang and I dealt with the 5 sleeping nearby. One woke up mid-attack and demanded to know who we were. I told him we were the ones who'd come to kill him, then drove my spear right through his chest. 8 guards down without raising any alarm. I waved a flaming torch in the air, the signal. I'd set up with you back during our hunting days. Safe to move. Within minutes, Wei Ming led 300 troops across the bridge and straight into the village. I told Wei Ming to hold position while Yu Shuang and I went ahead to handle the 4 guards. At the artisan's courtyard, we eliminated them silently. Another torch signal, and the men advanced to within 30 paces of the Chong camp. 2 watchtowers guarded the perimeter, each man by a lookout. I told Yu Shuang we'd each target one. On 3, we shoot together. We stood ready. Pull back and let fly. Both shots hit dead center. The guards dropped dead on their watch posts without making a sound. Yu Shuang and I scaled the flimsy wooden barricade and took control of both towers ourselves. From up there, we had a bird's-eye view of the whole camp. I told her our mission now was to pick off any Chong troops trying to rally the rest of the guys. Don't let them bunch up. I signaled with the torch from the tower. Wei Ming spotted it and gave the order, "Brothers, wipe them all out." 100 men rammed the wooden fence, bringing it down with a loud crash that woke the whole camp. A half-naked Chong Grunt stumbled out of his tent to see what the fuss was. My arrow dropped him to the dirt before he could utter a word. Wei Ming directed the raid. 10 guys to a tent, clearing them out one by one. From my perch, Yu Shuang and I kept sniping anyone who showed their face. More than a dozen fell within the very first minute. A Chong captain bolted from his tent in leather armor, screaming for everyone to fall back to HQ. I took a shot at him. He managed to parry my shaft with his blade, but the sheer force of the blow sent him reeling backward right into the tent. Wei Ming was an absolute beast, ripping through one tent after another with that massive dark broadsword, hacking down 7 or 8 soldiers before they could even reach for their gear. Inside, he came across terrified, naked women, prisoners the Chong had captured. He told them to stay put and kept on slashing. Right in the middle of the camp, the Chong chief, a high-ranking commander named Mulan, stood partly dressed outside his main quarters, watching the madness unfold in absolute fury. A guard brought over 2 mounts and begged him to escape. Mulan furiously demanded to know where his 2 captains were. The guards reported they were nowhere to be seen. The entire camp was descending into chaos. Our boys raided through every single tent, while Yu Shuang and I targeted anyone trying to rally a defense from up above. The Chong were caught completely wasted, asleep, and divided. They never even got a chance to form up. Mulan cursed us out and leaped onto a horse to escape. I let loose an arrow that clipped his ear, close enough to give him a real scare. Still, he gathered around a dozen mounted troops and made a mad dash for the exit. I shot every last arrow from the watchtower, then grabbed my spear and jumped straight down. The earth literally shook as I hit the ground, and I stood my ground right in the cavalry's path. Mulan yelled for them to take me out and spearheaded the assault. I lunged right at him, thrusting my spear toward his chest. Our blades collided with a deafening screech of steel. My brute force knocked him clean off his mount, but before I could finish the job, his squad pivoted and came swarming at me. Just then, 2 commanders arrived with dozens more riders. Suddenly, the odds were stacked against me. Mulan managed to scramble onto another horse and ordered everyone to swarm me. Things were looking pretty grim, but then Wei Ming came charging in with 300 troops, and the momentum shifted right back in our favor. Mulan realized they were losing ground and commanded a push toward the main gates. Nearly 100 horsemen rushed forward as one. Even I had to dive out of the way. They smashed through the gates, expecting open country, but stumbled right into a death trap instead. Li Jun's marksmen were lying in wait. The opening barrage dropped 30 riders instantly. Then, Xin Fang's wall of shields appeared. 100 soldiers with massive shields and long pikes, locking down the gate in a tight semicircle. Mu Lang caught the flaw right away. Barely 100 guys blocking the exit, so he ordered another push. Li Jun ordered free fire, unleashing another volley of arrows, dropping their numbers to under 30. Those remaining 30 slammed right into Chun Fei's shield wall. Spears ripped through both mounts and riders. A dozen of our front line shield bearers got sent flying from the impact, bones snapping, but the line stood firm. Mulan cut his way straight to Chun Feng himself, taking out one of our guys with a brutal slash. 10 shield bearers closed in on him instantly. Then Yu Shuang and I showed up with 100 more spearmen, locking the trap down completely. Mulan had maybe 15 horsemen left. He made one final, desperate charge right at me. I faced him head-on. He aimed his curved blade right at my head, but I parried with my spear. A single strike sent his sword spinning into the air. I lunged forward, driving the spearhead clean through his chest. He coughed up blood and died. His 2 centurions watched their leader drop and rushed at me in a blind rage. I shook Mulan's corpse off my weapon and threw it straight into one of them, bringing horse and rider crashing down together. Our spearmen quickly dogpiled the fallen centurion. Yu Shuang's squad hemmed in and finished off the other, along with the last remaining riders. Not a single Chong soldier was left standing. Wei Ming hoisted his massive blade toward the sky and let out a booming laugh. Li Jun walked over with Chun Feng, gazing at the sea of enemy bodies, totally stunned that the plan actually worked. Wei Ming announced that I deserved the highest honors for this victory, then ordered the men to clear the camp and round up every horse, grab every single grain bag, plus all the gear, and haul it straight back to Ningshan Fort. We actually pulled it off, 300 Chong horsemen, completely wiped out in just one night. As the camp blazed behind us, Yu came rushing over to let us know that 400 or 500 captive women had been discovered inside the tents, all seized by the Chong. Wei Ming gave the call to bring them all back to safety. Then, Deputy Xian Feng showed up with even better news. We'd secured over 300 war horses, along with a haul of more than 500 dan of grain. Wei Ming ordered every useful scrap loaded onto the wagons. Whatever we couldn't take was to be torched. We weren't leaving a single speck for those bastards. I instructed Gua to gather up all the Chong bodies and string them up along the camp stockade. Wei Ming wanted to know why, so I gave him 2 reasons. To send a clear message, and to goad the Chong into striking Ningxuan Fort. He stared at me like I'd lost my mind, so I broke down the strategy for him. Look, we just butchered 300 of their riders. They're going to want blood no matter what. It's far better to lure them to our mountain stronghold, where the high ground gives us the edge, than to let them catch us out in the open. That narrow pass ensures they can't throw overwhelming numbers at us. And with our stockpiles, we can easily outlast them. Winter is closing in. They can't afford a drawn-out siege. I dispatched Yuer and Chong on straight back to the village to unearth the concealed rations. Well over 1,000 Dan. Add that to the nearly 100 artisans who were shut away in that courtyard, complete with smiths and raw iron, already safely stationed up on our peak. And we can start hammering out our own gear. Come dawn, we were moving back toward the citadel, a massive convoy stretching over a kilometer, packed with mounts and supply wagons, liberated ladies, freed artisans, and seized weaponry. It was quite a spectacle. Right then, I made my pitch. I pitched the idea of building a cavalry squad to Wei Ming. He nearly hit the floor. Mounted troops cost a fortune. A single warhorse devoured 10 times more than a regular foot soldier. Qin Feng agreed that it sounded totally nuts. But Yu Shuang chimed in without hesitation, and threw her full support behind the plan. She even volunteered to lead the unit, and Li Jun backed her up. I explained we didn't need a massive army, just 100 riders. That was totally doable given the 300 horses we captured. This compact cavalry unit would serve as our ultimate trump card. Wei Ming caved. He handed complete control of the entire cavalry project over to Yu Shuang and myself, along with first dibs on any soldier in the fortress. However, he warned that sourcing the gear was entirely on us. Once the rest of the group headed inside, I lingered back with Yu Shuang near the mounts. I inquired if she actually knew how to train cavalry. She replied that she knew her way around them. I told her I needed 100 operational riders in just a fortnight, drilled well enough to keep their cool when things got chaotic. Our very lives were riding on this. She gaped at me like I'd completely lost my marbles. A mere 100 riders going up against thousands of Chong cavalry? I clarified that I had no intention of taking them head-on. I was envisioning sudden raids, arson attacks, and hit-and-run tactics. She gave a doubtful shake of her head, but didn't back out. She promised to deliver a functional mounted squad in about 2 weeks' time. But after that, she wanted to witness firsthand how I intended to crush an entire army with just 100 men. She trotted away with the herd, heading toward a deserted horse ranch 20 miles to the southeast, where a lush valley offered excellent grazing grounds. Yuder brought a horse over to me and asked if we were tagging along after Yu Shuang. You bet we were. I hopped into the saddle and dashed after her. Right behind me, Yuder was bouncing all over the place, screaming at me to take it easy, since he hadn't quite nailed down how to ride yet. 10 days post-raid Ningxuan Fort was completely reborn. The open pit mine was absolutely buzzing with energy. Scores of melting pots flared as bellows cranked away, and over 100 smiths pounded iron day and night. Literally everyone around the fort, men and women alike, had pitched in to help manufacture blades and bolts before the Chong hit back for payback. Our massive game changer. With a little trick I brought over from my past life. The steel casting process. We went through a few trial runs under my watch, but the metalworkers eventually got the hang of it. This specific method turned out blades way tougher and sharper than anything we'd ever handled, which honestly gave me a solid boost. For the upcoming clash, I intentionally kept Anchi City completely in the dark, along with the neighboring settlements. The longer it took the Chong to figure out our strike, the more breathing room we had to prep inside the main hall. Yua brought word that a couple of Chong scouts had finally come around to snoop on the Li clan's old outpost earlier that morning. Our bowmen quickly turned them into pincushions, which meant our time was officially running out. We had 5 days tops before Chong battalion rolled up to our gates. No joke. Gawa, now running supply lines as my second, broke down the stats. Displaced folks had been flooding into our stronghold, bumping our head count close to 2,000 deep. Rations could stretch 3 months for the civilians. But those 300 chargers were straight up draining our reserves. With them around, we had barely 2 weeks left. I made the call to unload 100 mounts to lighten the load, and hang on to 200. Yua brought up the idea of collecting bounties for the skirmish. Wayman smirked, and mentioned he'd forward a combat dispatch to Anchi tomorrow, mostly just to get the credit. mostly because he wanted to see Commander Joshing's reaction when reading it. I mentioned that our real priority wasn't silver, but an official upgrade to our garrison headcount. We were pushing nearly 1,000 troops by then. The records had to reflect that. Wei Ming agreed. The governor and Zhao Shang needed our wins on their own track record to escape blame from the imperial court for surrendering the Western Pass. They'd sign off on whatever we wanted. Wei Ming then brought up my strategy. For those 200 elite troops he'd kept ready for me, I replied that they'd be my secret weapon. Teaming up with Yu Shuang's 100 riders, they'd ambush the Chong army's camp by night, while the main unit secured the fort. He just stared. Another midnight raid? He grinned. Why the heck not? Throwing up his hands, he declared. That tactical planning was entirely on me now. He'd just show up to bust heads. I tried to object, but he insisted whoever has the skills should call the shots, even if it meant he took orders as a regular grunt. Just then, old Li entered holding a pristine blade, the very first ring pommel saber, crafted using our brand-new cast steel technique. Taking hold of it, I examined the craftsmanship. The edge was perfectly straight, measuring over 3 feet with a deep fuller. Li Yun smuggled, claiming it looked identical to any commonplace military weapon. I dared him to test it against his own steel. Unsheathing his weapon, he swung hard. Iron clashed violently against iron. Li Jun reeled back a couple of paces, and his favorite blade now had a notch in the rim. My saber didn't have a scratch. He stared in utter disbelief, muttering that this cast steel matched the finest quality of 100-fold forged iron. I ordered old Li to have the blacksmiths pull an all-nighter. I required 200 ring pommel sabers within 5 days, along with 200 round shields and another 300 leather armor suits from the women's workshop. The Chong were closing in, and by the time they hit, my boys will be packing the finest gear in the whole province. I handed the very first ring pommel saber to Li Jun. His own blade got nicked when he went up against my steel, so it only felt right. He took it without a second thought, and I noticed a real shift in his expression. The guy had been looking down on me since day one, figuring I was just some lucky thug. That little gift completely flipped the dynamic. I commanded Yu Wu to push our scouts out 30 miles and report back the second any Chong troops were spotted. Heading back to Green Valley Horse Ranch, I filled Yu Shuang in on selling 100 horses, plus the extra 200 troops Wei Ming had assigned to me. She nodded. 300 total at the ranch, 100 riders and 200 infantry. Not a bad little strike force. I explained to her that these 200-foot soldiers would eventually serve as backup cavalry. Once we booted the Chong out of Angshi, we'd assemble a legitimate mounted army. She noted it wouldn't be easy. I told her all it took was bodies, cash, and mounts. Time would sort out the rest. Over the next 4 days, the entire outpost transformed into a weapons plant. The smiths grinded, day and night hammering out ring pommel sabers. The women's workshop stitched together a budget version of what I called bright armor, a sleek breastplate made of 100-fold steel, backed by repurposed Chong leather, shielding everything else. It looked pretty basic, but drills proved it could deflect a blade. Those 300 sets went straight to my ranch boys first. The 700 back at the fort were still stuck in their flimsy red gear. Meanwhile, at the ranch, the 200 saber and shield troops trained in tactical formation warfare as the 100-strong cavalry drilled, hurling javelins at full gallop and executing lance charges. Yu Shuang was pretty intrigued by the javelin tactic. She noted it was way easier to pick up than mounted. Archery. I told her if we weren't so pressed for time, I would have built repeating crossbows for every rider. She asked me what a repeating crossbow even was. I just grinned and told her she'd find out soon enough. My best discovery during this time was Wang Wu, a 47-year-old, one-armed retired vet from the Imperial Guard. He was lean, weathered, and missing his left arm, yet with just his right, he could go toe-to-toe with Yu Shuang for dozens of rounds without breaking a sweat. Naturally, he became my infantry coach. Wang Wu drilled me in the military's official 13 cut, saber style. Thanks to my high intelligence stat, I streamlined those 13 moves down to 8 and dubbed it the Blood Battle 8 cuts. Every single strike targeted a vital spot, efficient, deadly, and tailor-made for the chaos of the battlefield. Wang Wu tested it out and gave it his blessing, reckoning it would massively cut down training time without losing any of its lethal edge. Once I mastered the technique, my system menu updated with a brand new tab. Martial Skills. Blood Battle 8 cuts popped up with a proficiency level of 5. The system also laid out some new mechanics. Martial Skill Proficiency couldn't be leveled up using attribute points, only through hard practice. Plus, once all 4 primary stats reached 100, I'd unlock the option to freely allocate fresh points into any stat I wanted, or dump them into upgrading cultivation methods. My current attributes have been climbing nicely from all the fighting. Strength, 30. Stamina, 28. Agility, 25. Intelligence, 15. But taking out Chong troops yielded way fewer points than I'd anticipated. Without my wives around, leveling up had slowed to a crawl. I missed them for plenty of reasons beyond just the system. Wang Wu remarked that I was the most gifted guy he'd ever come across. A quick study, unrivaled in battle, and bound for glory. Yu Shuang shot me a subtle smirk when he mentioned that. Suddenly, a scout burst in, looking ghostly pale. Wei Ming wanted us back at the stronghold pronto. The Chong army had been sighted. I left Wang Wu managing the outpost, and bolted alongside Yu Shuang, Ernio, and Guohua back to Ningxuan. The briefing room was dead silent as Wei Ming broke it down. 5,000 Chong soldiers would hit our mountain by nightfall, outnumbered 10 to 1. Worse yet, they brought along siege towers and catapults. They weren't treating this like a simple skirmish anymore. They wanted to wipe us out. All eyes turned to me for strategy. I offered a single word: stall. I needed the garrison to hold out for at least 5 days. On the 5th night, I'd command my 300 outpost fighters in a flanking ambush on their encampment. Li Jun shook his head. Surviving 5 days against 5,000, given our weak walls and rookie troops, is a total long shot. I countered that the secret wasn't fortifications, but grit. If we could give the Chong a bloody nose over the first 3 days and halt their drive, the rest will be downhill. A siege is a mind game. The first side to blink loses. Wei Ming inquired about our chances if they lasted 5 days. I replied 70%. He then asked about 10 days. I promised a guaranteed win. He stood up tall and vowed he'd buy me those 10 days. If a win was out of reach, he'd go down with the fort. Right then, he dropped the awesome news. Anchi City had finally gotten back to our war report. Wei Ming got bumped up to Millennium Captain, while I leaped ahead by 2.5 ranks, climbing from Sergeant straight up to Deputy Captain. Yu Shuang, Li Jun, and Xin Feng, along with Guohua and Ergu, all made military envoy. Ergu was completely blown away. He just kept muttering about actually being an officer now. Chun Feng chuckled and promised him that if we won this clash, he'd reach full captain status. Wei Ming backed it up, smashed those 5,000 Chong, and every single soul here gets a massive promotion. Wei Ming officially declared that if he fell in battle or couldn't be found, I would be the one taking charge of Ningxuan Fort. Nobody disputed it. I let Wei Ming know that I had a cart all the completed, gear straight back to the ranch right away. Over 100 ring pommel sabers, 300 armor sets, and roughly 900 javelins. He turned the whole lot over. I told the crew that I'd return on the 10th night. Until that moment, holding the fort was entirely up to them. Chun Feng beat his chest confidently, vowing that as long as he had breath in him, the fortress wouldn't fall. Wei Ming locked down the mountain from that point on. No one leaves. I headed back to the ranch with Yu Shuang, Ernie Guohua, Yu, and Chong just an hour before the foe showed up. From a crest, we could spot the Chong forces flooding right through the valley below us. Thousands of campfires starting to spark to life, and over 1,000 horsemen scouting the fields, encircling their massive camp. High up on the ramparts, Wei Ming and the rest witnessed that exact same view. He remarked that it seemed the Chong were dug in for the long haul. A 10-day siege, that was the agreement. By the 10th night, I put an end to this. I wasn't actually at the fort when it kicked off. I was 20 miles out at the ranch, getting my 300 men ready for the midnight raid set for day 10. But I caught every single detail later on from Wei Ming and the rest. On that very first night, the Chong didn't even bother waiting for dawn. Their commander, a general of 10,000 named Mo Ganshan from the Black Mountain tribe, was absolutely livid about what we'd done to his boys. Back at Li Family Village, he brought 5,000 warriors along and was dead set on wiping us out fast. He deployed 1,000 riders on patrol to ensure no one could slip away, then commanded an immediate strike. The Black Mountain crew had a serious point to prove. The White Wolf tribe had attempted to storm Mingshan Fort before, but backed off after losing barely 100 men. So Mo Ganshan wanted to show the rival tribes that Black Mountain could break through. Where White Wolf failed, he sent Centurion Bergen with 500-foot soldiers up the tight mountain pass, backed by 200 bowmen under a different officer named Botelli. A third commander, Dewar, suggested waiting until the catapults were fully set up, seeing as our archers up on the high walls would easily outrange theirs. Mo Ganshan completely shut him down, claiming the fort held only a few hundred raw recruits and some women and children, hardly worth waiting for heavy siege weapons. Up on the rampart, Wei Ming watched the torches winding up the mountain track. He ordered his archers to hold their fire and let them get close. The path leading to the gates was tight. Only 7 or 8 men could march abreast. The moment the first wave of Chong troops poured into the clearing right before the wall, Wei Ming gave the word. 100 bowmen, divided into 2 squads, began trading volleys. Let loose barrage after barrage of arrows. The initial 2 volleys dropped most of the vanguard. Dead bodies piled up on the open battlefield. Yet crowds kept coming, hauling 10-meter siege ladders, and screaming about the loot and women waiting inside. Botelli's 200 archers attempted to provide covering fire from the mountain trail, but they were aiming uphill at defenders entrenched behind stone walls, making them pretty much useless. Meanwhile, Li Yun took charge of our bowmen with stone-cold precision, managing volley after volley. Every single round of arrows felled another dozen or 20 foes. Once enough Chong troops had forced their way to the base of the fortification and started propping up ladders, Li Jun split up his archers. Half shifted to the top of the gate tower to rain fire down the length of the mountain track, transforming it into a total killing corridor. The remaining half held the ramparts, picking off climbers and targeting anyone left in the clearing below. Wei Ming had already blocked off the gate with sandbags. Even a battering ram wasn't going to burst through. The whole clash would be decided right on those 50 meters of wall. Sundan, Yi Yushuang's ruthless second-in-command, rushed 100 spearmen up to the battlements to skewer anyone who managed to reach the top of the ladders. Our lines were holding up. The bottleneck terrain was working exactly as I'd anticipated, funneling the hostile army into a tight choke point, where our bowmen could effortlessly butcher them. The true conflict had kicked off, and I had 9 more days left to hold out. That opening assault dragged on for 2 solid hours before the Chong war horns blew for retreat at midnight. Wei Ming filled me in later that they'd wiped out around 300 to 400 enemy combatants. It was merely a tester attack. The actual onslaught would hit over the next couple of days. Qin Fong didn't sugarcoat what he had witnessed. Our forces were simply no match for the Chong head-to-head. Those enemy troops were dead fearless, while most of our guys had never seen real combat before tonight. If the Chong ever locked down total control of the wall, we'd be completely finished. Wei Ming agreed, but noted that bloodshed was the ultimate teacher. A few more days of this grit, and our men would toughen up. Down at the hostile camp, their commander, Mo Ganshan, a general commanding 10,000 men, wasn't sweating the failure of their first strike. He had only sent it to test us. His centurion, Bergen, reported that our outpost had solid fortifications, tons of bowmen, and at least 500 battle-ready troops. Montak Gunskan promised to give Bergen 2,000 fighters by tomorrow morning, along with 500 archers and heavy catapults. He commanded 3 other centurions to sweep a 10-mile radius to ensure no backup could ever reach us. In Anchi City, Governor Chien called a sudden crisis meeting. His scouts couldn't get close enough to spot what was going down at our fort. He wanted to deploy backup, but had no forces available. The whole area was swarming with 60,000 Chong, split across 3 separate tribal forces. The closest county seat, Linxing, was currently besieged by 10,000 Black Mountain warriors. Commander Zhao Chong shut down every single rescue proposal brought up. Deputy Commander Zhang Yuan Shan, the very guy who had backed us up at the North Camp, suggested deploying Zhang Bai from Copper Mountain Fort. Zhao Chong blocked that option too, arguing that 1,000 troops would just be easy meat for their enemy cavalry. Zhang Yuan Shan then brought up a more sinister theory. He wondered if the provincial governor had low-key cut a backroom deal with the Chong, given that the tribes were strictly hitting Anchi district, while leaving the remaining 3 regions completely untouched. Zhao Chong silenced him immediately, claiming the governor was merely playing a strategic game. Not a single soul in there bought his story. The governor wrapped up the session without deciding a thing. Ningshan Fort was left entirely on its own. Meanwhile, 20 miles off at the ranch, I called my crew together. We crowded around a long table in the dim lamplight. Yushuang, Guova, Yue, Aniu, Wang Wu, and Changjin all sat waiting as I laid out the plan. Yue would spearhead the scouts to keep tabs on Chong patrol movements within a 30-mile radius, but they absolutely could not afford to get compromised. If spotted, they had to fall back toward Nanan district, drawing them away from the ranch, not toward it. We couldn't take the chance of the enemy stumbling upon our concealed forces. Yushuang and Wang Wu were to keep drilling, strictly inside the valley, with total noise discipline. Nobody was allowed past the canyon's mouth. The cavalry would run formation drills with the 200 infantrymen, One half would master the blood battle 8 cuts, while the rest focused on spear wall tactics. Time was running out, and every single second mattered. Out there in the pitch black, I could practically hear the distant echoes of combat reverberating from the peaks. Wei Ming was bleeding to buy me the time I desperately needed, and I wasn't going to waste a moment of it. Updates from Stronghold kept trickling in. Throughout those opening days, by the second morning, the Chong forces hit us again, this time in broad daylight, bringing over 1,000 troops and scaling ladders. Chun Feng masterfully directed the defenses along the wall. Our 300 bowmen poured volleys of arrows down the tight mountain pass. Every single wave of attackers that managed to reach the clearing right in front of the wall was instantly shredded. The Chong centurion, Bergen, ordered his troops to pile up their own casualties into ramps to scale the barricade, but Chun Feng anticipated that move. He ordered flammable oil brought up in earthenware pots as the Chong began scrambling over scaling ladders and dead bodies. Dumping the liquid down, he ignited it with flaming arrows. The entire base of the rampart burst into a raging fire. Well over 100 Chong troops were engulfed by the blaze within seconds. Their agonizing shrieks resounded all over the mountain. The warriors still stuck on the trail went white and flat out refused to push forward. Varagon pulled his forces back and called in for catapult cover. Botelli had stationed 5 heavy stone launchers down below, and they immediately began hurling 100-pound boulders right at the fortress. The initial salvos missed the mark entirely. It was a seriously tough angle. Plus, the stronghold was carved right into the ridge. But after tweaking their aim a few times, they started battering the main wall and the gate. Even so, the masonry stood absolutely firm. The projectiles just didn't have the weight to smash through it. So Bargain launched another assault with 1,000 troops, while Botelli's archers attempted to pin down our riflemen up on the battlements. The fierce combat dragged on all day, from daybreak until sundown. By the time the bugles finally signaled a retreat, close to 1,000 Chong fighters lay dead or badly wounded. Bargain himself caught an arrow straight to the arm. Later that night, Mo Ganzhan was absolutely livid back at the enemy camp. He commanded 3 centurions to join forces for an all-out, massive offensive the following morning. Capturing that fort was a must. Otherwise, none of them would be making it back to the steppes alive. One of his subordinates, Botelli, cautiously put forward the idea of dropping the siege and plundering south into Nanan district instead. Mo Ganzhan totally lost it, letting slip that they're great. Khan had cut a backroom deal with Guofengxian, the governor of Liang province. They were strictly permitted to raid only Sher district. The remaining 3 territories were totally off-limits. That locked in exactly what Deputy Commander Zhang had a hunch about. Down in the city, the governor had totally sold out Anqi to the Chong in some shady backroom deal. In the meantime, our scouts had been spotted by Chong patrols, but Mo Ganzhan shrugged them off as Nanan onlookers, who were too chicken to step in. He had zero clue that my 300 troops were lying low, just 20 miles off, drilling day and night in a secluded valley, just waiting for that 10th night at the ranch. I could feel time running out, with every distant thud echoing over the ridges. Wei Ming was buying me time with blood, so I drove my guys even harder, practicing the 8-cut combat style until their arms went numb, hurling javelins until their shoulders were on fire, and running cavalry drills until the horses were lathered in foam. 7 days to go. Back at the stronghold, Wei Ming called a council of war after the second day of clashes. He warned everyone that the upcoming 9 days would be pure hell, and they absolutely had to hold the line. Chu Wenfeng's voice was completely shot, and his eyes were totally bloodshot. He'd been up on the ramparts all day long. Wei Ming declared he would personally take charge from the gate tower come tomorrow morning. Ergo brought up that those ring pommel sabers were absolutely lethal in close-quarters combat. One good chop could cleave a Chong helmet, and the head underneath straight in half. Oldley noted they had roughly 30 ready to go, with maybe another 15 finished by dawn. 50 sabers passed around among the wall guards, paired up with 50 spearmen. Ought to be plenty to secure the parapets. Qin Fong figured the strategy was basic. Any Chong trooper who managed to scale the top gets dropped immediately, as long as they maintained that the wall wouldn't breach. Meanwhile, out at my ranch, you shared what he'd spotted from afar. The clash had been brutal. The Chong even deployed their catapults, though their aim was total garbage. They actually took out a few of their own guys. With those stray shots, I figured the enemy still had over 4,000 battle-ready troops. The fort's casualties should be way lower. Perks of having the defensive advantage. Without working catapults, the next 2 days would just be a test of pure grit. Whoever blinks first loses. Yushuang murmured that as long as Wei Ming held that wall, the fort wouldn't fall. Totally, Ernia chimed in. Wei Ming was our rock. Ernia described watching him slice through 3 Chong warriors with one single chop during the midnight raid. So the guy looked like a god of war. Then Yushuang noted something that piqued my interest. She mentioned Wei Ming was likely a 5th-rank blood ignition martial artist. I've been hearing these different ranks thrown around since I got here, 4th rank this, 5th rank that. And I finally owned up to the fact that I had zero clue what any of it actually meant. I'd never actually studied martial cultivation. Yushuang just gawked at me, totally stunned. How could someone with my kind of power be clueless about the martial ranking system? I just shrugged and served up my usual line about being born strong and doing a ton of working out. She sighed and broke down the entire setup. 9 distinct ranks of martial cultivation. The first rank is aperture opening, which means unblocking the body's meridian points using medicinal baths, or with the backing of a 7th rank master. The second rank covers skin tempering, toughening up the body's outer layer, and massively boosting your raw physical power. The third rank is bone forging, combined with skin tempering. These 2 ranks unlock what's known as copper skin and iron bones, rendering you pretty much immune to basic weapons. Rank 4 is blood chi, learning to sense and absorb natural, spiritual energy from your surroundings, and converting it into inner power. The 5th rank is blood ignition, burning through your own vital energy, via spécialisée technique, to multiply your overall combat effectiveness several times over in short bursts. Rank 6 is meridian opening, which means unblocking all 8 extraordinary meridians to unleash 10,000 pounds of raw force with one punch. The 7th rank is shackle breaking, demolishing the body's 8 inner gates to achieve tens of thousands of pounds of striking power. These are the true elites who command massive armies, the 8th and 9th ranks. She dubbed Mountain River and Grandmaster, though she confessed she lacked the details on either one. I paid close attention and compared it to my own statistics. My raw strength was 36 times that of an average man, which seemingly put me right around the 5th rank level, even without ever practicing a single cultivation method. If my status interface ever activated a cultivation feature, I could potentially blend my innate attributes with martial arts. The idea made me smirk, but that was a problem for later. As of right now, I had only 8 days until the raid, so every single hour of practice mattered. Before the strategy meetings and training drills began, Yua had previously asked Yushuang about her level. She mentioned that she and Li Jun were both in the early stages of 4th rank blood chi, the second most powerful in the fortress behind Wayman. When they brought me up, she threw a glance my way and pinned me somewhere around the 5th or 6th tier. She was just guessing, but Wang Wu was way more spot on. He reckoned I could go toe-to-toe with a peak 5th rank fighter, maybe even take him down. Yuri's jaw totally dropped. I told the guy not to get his hopes up too high. A 5th rank martial artist went up against hundreds of Chong horsemen, would still have to haul ass to survive. Brute force only gets you so far. Ernio then chimed in, asking if an 8th or 9th tier warrior could actually face hundreds of cavalry on their own. Wang Wu's eyes totally lit up. He said he'd seen for himself a 7th rank powerhouse plow straight through thousands of troops 3 times over, leading just 800 men to completely smash 7,000 elites. That was the legendary battle of Liang Mountain 2 decades back. And Wang Wu was actually right there as one of those 800 soldiers, serving right under Duke Xinghua, Wu Changha. When I asked who this duke was, Yushuang shut me down coldly, saying I wasn't nearly a big enough deal to meet him yet. Supposedly, once I've kicked every single Chong raider back to the steppes, I might get my shot. Man, she really loved keeping me humble. 9 brutal days dragged by, with every daily update from the front lines, getting tougher and tougher to stomach. By the 9th night, the main wall was on the verge of collapse. Chin Phone could barely manage a whisper. His voice was totally shot, his face covered in crusty, dry blood. Ergo was pretty much covered in deep gashes, but he absolutely refused to step down from the rampart. Li Jun's left arm had been hacked wide open right to the bone, yet he just bound it up himself and kept on swinging. When Wei Ming inquired how many combat-ready troops were left, Li Jun answered around 300. They had originally started with 700, but the Chong side had suffered a whole lot worse. Out of 5,000, scarcely 2,000 remained fit for battle. 9 days of storming up that narrow mountain pass, right into arrows, flaming oil, spears, and ring pommel sabers had completely gutted them. The clash on that 9th night was brutal. stretching from twilight deep into the dead of night. The Rong hit them wave after wave. Wei Ming defended the rampart, blade in hand, the entire time. When the war horns finally signaled the retreat, the outpost was still standing. Over in the enemy camp, General Mo Ganzhan was biting back a massive fit of rage. 5,000 troops, more than half wiped out, yet a tiny hill fort still held him off. His 5 commanders dropped to their knees and signed an oath in blood. They vowed to crush the fortress within 48 hours or pay with their heads. Mo Ganzhan locked in that deadline. 2 days from then, no quarters given. Back at my estate that same evening, I called a meeting to finalize our strategy. Come tomorrow morning, I'd have Ernyo take a squad to bait some Rome. Scouts back toward the Tianshui River. Not too fast, not too slow. Just enough to keep them on the hook. Gao got the angle immediately. I wanted to take a few prisoners alive, to grill them about the current state of the enemy camp. Ernyo was clueless, so Gao had to break it down for him. I gave Ernyo a look and told him to start using his head, or else stop bragging too. Everyone that we grew up in the same village. Wang Wu chimed in, asking if tomorrow night was the big push. I told him it was, but that he was sitting this one out at the ranch. He pushed back hard, swearing he could still scrap. Better with one arm than my 3 lieutenants combined. Yu Shuang stepped in to ease the tension, explaining softly that it wasn't a question of his skill, but what would happen if things went south? Who's going to train our future troops? Who'll pass down those blood battle 8 strikes to the next generation? I jumped right on that. Exactly. You're our treasure, old Wang. We can't risk you. He grumbled, but he gave in. Yu Shuang shot me a glare for stealing her talking point, so I secretly flashed her a thumbs up. She just rolled her eyes. Tomorrow's the 10th night. Time to wrap this up. I ordered everyone to rest the next day. Know that they needed to save their energy for the night. Yu Shuang's cavalry had to wrap their horses' hooves in fabric and muzzle them to keep things quiet. I told Wang Wu he'd be holding down the ranch once we deployed, likely for a few days. He swore that no one would step foot in the valley while he was still breathing. That morning, I set up my ambush at the Tianshui River. Yu rode out with 5 men as bait, intentionally letting Chang's scouts spot them and give chase. He lured roughly 15 enemy horsemen straight to the riverbank, where Aaron, Yu, Gua, and I lay waiting in the tall brush, alongside 100 shield and spear troops. The Chong centurion leading the scouts smirked when he saw Yuer's squad pinned against the water. But then my men stood up from the brush right behind him, cutting off his retreat. Yuer smirked back and told them to throw down their weapons. The centurion scoffed, claiming 100-foot soldiers stood no chance against Black Mountain riders. Yuer pointed right at me as I stepped out from behind the shield wall and said, "Maybe they can't, but he can." The centurion wheeled his mount and charged straight at my line. I drew my bowstring and drove an arrow clean through his horse's skull. The beast dropped dead on the spot, sending him crashing heavily to the dirt. Chong and a couple of guys had him bound tight before he could even scramble up. Suddenly, another rider lunged at me with his blade raised. I sprang up, drew my ring pommel saber, and decapitated him in a single swipe. I ordered the archers to target the horses, not the riders. Dozens of arrows brought down every single mount. All 15 scouts were sent crashing to the dirt. I charged into them on horseback, blade in hand, slashing down anyone who tried to fight back. Within moments, more than half were wiped out. The final 5 stared up at me, dripping blade in hand, covered in their buddy's blood, and finally dropped their weapons. Yuer chuckled and scoffed. So much for the Chong. Warriors never giving up. I had the survivors tied up and ordered the dead horses and corpses tossed in the river to cover our tracks. We dragged 6 captives back to the ranch. I handed them over to Wang Wu, telling him I wanted to know everything regarding the hostile camp. The centurion howled that they'd never turn on Black Mountain. Wang Wu just smirked, the kind of creepy grin that gives you goosebumps, and noted the Great Qin dynasty boasted 108 ways to torture. He told the captives he hoped they'd keep their mouths shut, since the fun would last a whole lot longer that way. The centurion cracked before Wang Wu could even start. He promised to spill everything. I left Wang Wu to his business and walked to Yu Shuang's cabin to map out tonight's strategy. The 10th night had arrived. Inside the cabin, I detailed the attack after reviewing everything Wang Wu had squeezed out of the prisoners. The enemy camp's northeast flank held their supply depot, provisions, weaponry, and feed, making it their weakest link. I gave the word. We'd strike in the dead of night. Every soldier would bite down on a wooden bit to keep completely quiet, and every horse would have muffled hooves. With horses muzzled, Yu Shuang, while I took charge of the 100 riders. Ernyu commanded the shield and spear troops, and Guo led the saber and bow units. We halted 3 miles out from the camp's northeast flank. Our riders were to hit them first, with the infantry following right behind in tight formation. I spelled it out clearly. Our primary objective was torching their rations. Taking lives was an afterthought. If we managed to wipe out their food and gear, they'd have zero choice but to pull back. This single clash would seal the fate of Ningxian Fort. Once the guys split up to prep, Yushuang hung back and asked me point-blank just how confident I actually was. Leaning right in her face, I asked if she was terrified. She looked away, blushing furiously from ear to ear, and snapped that she'd never been scared a damn thing in her entire life. I leaned back and gave it to her straight. Maybe a 60 or 70% chance. She pointed out that 2,000 Chong heavy cavalry against our paltry 300 meant brutal odds. I told her that didn't matter. We couldn't just sit idly by and watch the outpost fall. Beating herself up, she muttered that given 3 months, she could have trained a mounted force, capable of crushing any Chong battalion. I assured her that day would come. Dead in the night, our 300 troops advanced, gliding through the dark like a silent black serpent, until we hit the tree line, 3 miles northeast of the enemy encampment. Scouts confirmed there wasn't a Chong lookout in sight. I ordered the riders to walk their mounts forward, then saddle up at 200 meters and charge full throttle. Yushuang and I sneaked ahead on foot first, creeping right up to the wooden stockade of the camp to secure heavy ropes around a row of palisades, before dashing straight back to our horses. At my command, a few fellow horsemen and I yanked the lines, and an entire stretch of the barricade, measuring 15 meters across, came crashing down. The racket jarred the guard awake, but before they could even utter a couple of words, 100 cavalrymen came roaring through the opening, like the grim reaper emerging from the shadows. Yushuang and I spearheaded the assault, picking watchmen off their guard towers with our bows on the move. The entire encampment plunged into absolute chaos. We kicked over every single campfire and torch in our path, torching one tent after another. The Chong troops came tumbling out of their quarters, half-dressed and dazed, running straight into our spears and blades. Inside the main tent, General Montak Gansan woke up to the sound of hooves rattling the ground. His personal guards pleaded with him to run, while he bellowed for his forces to regroup. But his men just couldn't form lines. Blazes were breaking out everywhere, and my riders slaughtered anyone who showed their face. Right behind us, Ernio and Goa's 200-foot soldiers swarmed through the gap in the barricade and began methodically clearing out the tents, eliminating every single Chong soldier who ventured out. Centurion Bergen, the guy who took a hit to the arm a few days back, staggered from his quarters and spotted our troops. Before he could even make a move, Goa's bowman unleashed a hail of arrows right into him, dropping him like a pincushion. Another commander, Meng Jire, managed to get on a horse and rally a dozen riders. He headed straight for me. I ordered Yushuang to keep the cavalry burning down tents, while I dealt with this crew by myself. Wheeling my mount around, I lowered the dark iron spear and charged to meet them head-on. High up on the fortress wall, Ergo caught sight of the flames bursting out across the enemy camp and yelled that our attack had begun. Wei Ming didn't hesitate for a second. He questioned Li Jun on how many troops could still fight. 200. Wei Ming grabbed his massive broadsword and declared he was heading down the mountain to join the slaughter. He commanded that the 200 be ready immediately. Down in the camp, I was already knee-deep in the carnage. Centurion Ming Jar lunged right at me alongside his cavalry. A single clash was all it took. My spear impaled him straight through the chest. I hurled his corpse directly at the oncoming riders. One gutsy fool shrieked for vengeance and rushed me with his blade raised high. I whipped my spear sideways and took his head right off. Blood splattered everywhere. The rest of his squad crumbled and bolted, howling that I was a complete monster. Something inside me woke up that night, a primal thirst for blood I'd never known before. Every strike of my spear meant death. Any Chong soldier who got within 5 meters of me dropped instantly. Centurion Yasuda attempted to regroup his troops by the central command tent. I caught sight of him and barreled forward. His bodyguards scrambled to block my path, but I cut them down one by one without breaking stride. Yasuda took a single look at me butchering his men and bolted toward General Mo Ganshan's defensive position. Yu showed up with roughly 30 horsemen. Yu Shuang had deployed him to back me up while she commanded the primary cavalry force, assisting Ernio and Go Wa in clearing out the camp. Even Yu seemed visibly rattled. He mentioned he'd never seen me act like this. I ordered him to fall in and push straight into the enemy headquarters. Montak Anzan stood poised, just outside his tent, flanked by more than 100 assembled riders, the last structured unit remaining in the camp. Yasuda pointed toward me and informed the general. that I had already executed 2 of his centurions. Montak Gansan promised a promotion to 1,000-man captaincy to anyone who served up my head. 100 Chong cavalrymen let a battle cry and charged right at us. The earth trembled. Ur and his 30 horsemen flinched, but I didn't. I rode straight at them, with a single swipe of my spear. 3 heads were lopped off into the night sky all at once. Their onslaught stalled. Ur barked at his squad to hurl javelins. Some 30 iron spears soared through the air, impaling more than a dozen riders, completely shattering the enemy line's momentum. I tore right into the thick of them solo, whirling that black iron lance like a hurricane. Anyone in arm's reach was dead in under a minute. I had personally taken down 30 or 40 men. Ur's riders flanked them from both sides, cutting down another 20 or 30. Emma Ganshan couldn't believe his own eyes. He screamed for a retreat, and the surviving few dozen horsemen wheeled back toward the camp gates, only to find Wei Ming waiting for them. 200 troops from the fortress, 100 shield spearmen and 100 archers, stood in flawless formation just outside the entrance. Wei Ming roared the command, and 100 arrows ripped into the fleeing cavalry. Half of them dropped from their saddles, while the rest scattered southeast in total panic. Emo Ganshan, shielded by a dozen bodyguards, escaped into the dark toward the southeast. Behind him, his entire encampment was ablaze, his army ruined. I didn't let up. With Ur's riders at my back, I relentlessly pursued Emo Ganshan's fleeing retinue. Back at the burning camp, Wei Ming linked up with Yushuang, Aaron Yeo, and Go Hua, who were coming out from inside. She demanded to know where I was, and Wei Ming, letting her know, I pursued the enemy commander moving southeastward in the direction of Linxiang County, right where the bulk of the Black Mountain forces rested. Skipping any permission, she simply ordered Wei Ming to wrap up the base cleanup before sprinting off, right behind me with her remaining cavalry. It didn't take long to catch up with Emo Ganshan's crew. He threw his final 2 centurions right at me, commanding Botelli and Yasuda to buy him some time. Tonight's slaughter had racked up over a dozen attribute points for me, boosting my power and quickness way past anything I'd ever experienced before. The pair of centurions flanked me from both sides, brandishing their sabers. 2 quick jabs to slash throats. They clutched at their necks as blood sprayed right through their fingers, and then collapsed off their mounts simultaneously. They barely even caught my spear strike. I ordered my troops to collect their heads and press the chase. We hounded Imogon, Shan straight to the border of Linxiang County, the very spot where the primary Black Mountain base, numbering well over 10,000 men, was dug in. Emo Ganshan shrieked at the sentries to open up, triggering the outpost's alarms. Beacons ignited all along the horizon, even the sentries up on Linxiang's ramparts woke up and rushed to their defensive posts, assuming a full assault was underway. Emo Ganshan kept hollering at the entrance, but it just wasn't budging fast enough. I closed in from behind, merely 20 meters away, my gore-drenched spear reflecting the blaze. His personal guard spun around to block me. A dozen riders struck, but I ripped through them in a single sweep, sending bodies spilling from their saddles left and right. Emo Ganshan was just 10 meters ahead, still crying out as I aimed my spear and lunged. The dark iron blade, the spearhead tore straight through his back and out his chest. He shrieked and crashed off his horse. I leaped down, snatching a golden command token from his belt, and griefed, saying, "No, man, Commander Montak Ganshan," with a mountain crest on the reverse side. By the time Yushuang rolled up with nearly 100 riders, I was already back-mounted, sitting 100 paces from the Black Mountain camp gates. Holding up the medallion, I tossed it over to her. She scanned the text, and her eyes went wide. A 10,000-man general, under Great Qin military law, slaying an enemy commander of that caliber earned you a noble title, Ishuted for Arniu tu Komov, and ordered him to take Emo Ganshan's head. We were heading home. Suddenly, the camp bugles shifted tone. Yushuang recognized the call, cavalry deployment. The gates burst wide open, and hundreds of hooves started thundering inside. She said we had to fall back. Right now, I told her to take the squad and ride out. I'd hold the line to cover their retreat. She refused, insisting that if we left together. So I pulled rank. As deputy captain, I was ordering her to move out. Standing here solo, I draw all their heat. If everyone bunched up, I couldn't cut loose. She gritted her teeth, wheeled her mount around, and spearheaded the riders northwest toward Ningxiang at a full gallop. I faced the open gates completely alone, as hundreds of heavy cavalry came pouring out. I roared so loudly that it echoed off the fortress walls and the faraway city. Who dares challenge me? High on Linxiang's ramparts, the county magistrate peered into the pitch black. looking toward the Black Mountain camp, and posed a question to his officers that none of them could answer. Who is that man standing alone against 10,000 enemies, demanding a fight atop the Linqing city walls? The county magistrate and his officers listened, looked on in total disbelief. They couldn't grasp why a lone warrior was fighting solo right outside the Black Mountain camp. They figured I might be from Ningxia Fort, yet couldn't wrap their heads around how, seeing as the fort was supposed to be surrounded. A Chong centurion deployed a few hundred horsemen and hemmed me in. Just then, one of Mo Ganshan's surviving guards rushed over and filled the centurion in on the situation. I'd taken out the 10,000-man general and 4 centurions. Meng Jier, Barajan Batelli, and Yasuda, all slain by my hand. The centurion was so paralyzed with shock he forgot to order the strike. Seizing that moment, I decapitated Mo Ganshan, shoved his head into my saddlebag, and blitzed straight toward the weakest link in their formation. My spear tore through a pair of riders, sending heads rolling as I smashed right through. Thousands of Chong cavalrymen flooded out from camp and pursued me across the vast plains. I dashed northwest, striking down anyone who came near. After dozens of miles, their primary force halted at the edge of Nanan district. They were under orders not to cross. Still, about 100 stubborn riders kept on coming. I wheeled my horse around to face them head-on. They thought they had me cornered. Their centurion bellowed for my blood, but I charged straight back at them. My opening strike impaled 2 men instantly, driving the spear clean through both of them. Then I went full berserk. My blood was absolutely boiling. Every single muscle felt primed to explode with power. I sliced through their ranks like a hurricane, dropping over a dozen in seconds. The centurion, watching from the sidelines, went completely pale the moment I started riding his way. He lost his nerve and bolted back to the main army. The whole situation was laughable. 100 horsemen had been hunting me down, and now I was the one tracking them. Centurion Zhou Reiming watched his troops retreat in absolute panic, completely baffled by what was going on. The centurion who had spearheaded the chase lied through his teeth, claiming I possessed infinite stamina and had single-handedly wiped out half their squad. I reined in my horse, stopping 100 paces from their massive cavalry, and bellowed once more, "Who dares to challenge me?" Zhou Reiming was just about to signal an attack when I simply wheeled around and galloped off, fading into the night. He soon realized I was just bluffing, just buying some time for my people to get away. Yet, fearing an ambush, he didn't dare pursue. By daybreak, I emerged from the early morning fog, heading toward the seized Chong fortress nestled at the foot of Ningxia Mountain. Rows of hundreds of soldiers lined up at the entrance, cheering my name. Chong'an stood there rubbing his bloodshot eyes, holding back tears. He murmured that he always knew I'd make it back. The others asked if the Chong army was hot on my heels. I told them I'd taken them on a wild goose chase, butchered another group, and that they were far too spooked to keep following. Yushuang stood with her arms crossed, her expression frozen like ice. She was still furious that I'd pulled rank on her, demanding she leave me behind. She growled under her breath about how careless and idiotic I was. I merely smirked. Victory was ours. We took the camp, the general was finished, and I was breathing. Good enough for me. Ernio whispered to me that if I'd been a moment later, Yushuang would have ridden out to find me herself. Catching sight of that subtle pout on her face, I chuckled to myself. Fierce on the outside, but a total softy at heart. Wei Ming propped himself up on his broadsword and ordered the crew to head back to the fortress. But Gowa cut us off because he'd bagged a Chong officer claiming to be a centurion by the name of Doer. The guy was begging for a chat, but Wei Ming just glared at the tied-up, shivering captive and told us to just finish him off. A centurion's noggin was worth a cool 1,000 taels. The soldier flipped out and blurted out that he had crucial intel, insisting he wanted to throw in the towel. He swore he'd never harmed any Qin civilians, never laid a hand on any women, and that his own mother actually hailed from Great Qin. He was half Qin by blood. I instructed Wei Ming to keep him breathing, as I had some questions. We also managed to seize over 1,000 chargers from their camp. I told Doer to transfer them to the pasture in separate groups, keeping a sharp lookout for Chong scouts on the route. Once we were back in the briefing hall, I interrogated the soldier. He was rattling so violently he could scarcely get the words out. I told him to take it easy, and that we wouldn't off him, but then he dropped a total bombshell. In roughly a month, right as the 3 tribal forces were getting ready to retreat to the steppes, they were plotting to pull off blitz raids on 3 different county towns. During those final 10 days, Black Mountain was going to blitz Lynchburg County, White Wolf would smash Shea County, an Iron Barbarian, would raid Bazan County right by Copper Mountain Fort. The entire room fell dead quiet, and Wei Ming's expression went grim. If this wasn't a bluff, 3 whole counties were lined up for a bloodbath. Li Jun argued that our hands were tied here, noting we were just too outmatched. Ergor reckoned we ought to report this to the provincial governor without delay. Chun Feng just shook his head. If the chief wanted to take on the clans, he would have deployed battalions a long time ago. The guy clearly cut some kind of backroom deal. Keeping my cool, I pressed the fighter for the figures. Black Mountain deployed a total of 20,000 men. Around 5,000 had advanced on Ningxuan, leaving 15,000 to handle the lynchings outside. Iron Barbarian commanded another 20,000 troops. White Wolf rallied 30,000 more. That made 70,000 Chong fighters flooding the Anqi district. Ergo practically tumbled out of his seat. No wonder the governor refused to put up a fight. Then the fighter dropped an even bigger bombshell. This year's raid was merely a test run. By next spring, the 3 factions intended to amass 200,000 troops to launch an all-out assault against Great Chien, aiming to completely level Line Province. I demanded to know how they managed to seize West Mountain Pass in the first place. Dewar explained that following a long period of peace, the defenders at the pass had grown lazy. The 3 allied tribes massed their troops as Nalan traders, gradually filtering small bands of 20 or 30 through the gates over time. Once their numbers inside were high enough, they pulled off a coordinated strike and forced the gates open. My thoughts immediately drifted to Nalan Cheer, the princess I had previously saved in the peaks. When I brought up her people, Dewar noted that the Nalan were obliterated by the Alliance, leaving only a handful of survivors to escape deep into the Tian Shan range. Choosing to spare Dewar's life, I dubbed him Wang Yahu, Wang, the slayer of barbarians, and put him under Aaron Yeo's watch. I made it clear to Aaron Yeo that if the captive broke out, his own head would be on the chopping block. Wei Ming looked over, asking what our next move should be. It was clear he now fully recognized me as the actual leader, running the show at Ningxuan Fort. I told him we would hold our ground for now, continue rounding up displaced folks from the woods, and take in as many as possible. Dispatch scouts to keep a tight eye on the Black Mountain camp. If their actual plan was to strike Linshin, they would have to construct siege weapons beforehand, which would serve as our dead giveaway. The immediate danger had blown over, yet a far greater tempest was brewing. Li Jun inquired whether we ought to alert the 3 county towns. I agreed, telling him to send couriers to all 3 jurisdictions, along with Copper Mountain Fort and Governor Chien. However, we had to hold off for now. If the tribes caught wind that we were onto their strategy, they would simply pivot. It was wiser to wait a fortnight before soundly ringing the alarm. Wei Ming calculated the plunder from our ambush. Roughly 2,000 stones of provisions, tens of thousands of taels in silver bullion, tens of thousands of strings of copper currency, and a crate packed with gold ingots. The overall worth hovered around 300,000 taels. The bulk of it belonged to Mo Ganshan's private hoard. Inside the headquarters tent, Wei Ming admitted he'd spent a lifetime in service and never laid eyes on such a massive fortune. It slipped my mind completely, but Mo Ganshan's severed head was still sitting in my saddlebag. Wei Ming's jaw dropped when I brought it up out of the blue. He noted that taking down a 10,000-strong commander was more than enough to secure me a peerage, a county baron title at least. I quipped back that I was actually shooting for Viscount. Yu Shuang chimed in, telling me not to get greedy. Guo War brought up a solid point, though. Would the Black Mountain tribes scrap their objective of invading Linshin and target us instead? I told him no way. We just annihilated their 5,000-man vanguard, and they had 0 clues regarding our actual numbers. They wouldn't gamble on another offensive against our mountain stronghold. Linshin remained a far more lucrative target, full of women, gold, grain, and labor. Besides, I suspected they had already deployed informants. Once inside the city walls, I instructed Wei Ming to keep the smithies hammering out gear non-stop and tasked the women's workshop with reworking the looted leather armor into our own modified bright plates. He agreed, putting Old Li in charge. After the meeting broke up, I pulled Wei Ming aside and told him to sit on the official combat report for now. I didn't want this news reaching the capital anytime soon. A win this massive was bound to draw some dangerous attention, and we were still way too small to handle that kind of heat. He caught my drift and said we'd claim our rewards later, down to the last dime. 3 peaceful days went by. I was over at the ranch, poring over maps of the Ungshi area with Yu Shuang. Wen Yuer, rushing to tell me someone was looking for me. A guy named Lei Qinshan, the ex-deputy commander of West Mountain Pass. I headed down to the valley entrance to meet him. The guy was massive, 2 meters tall, skin like bronze, with a jawline that looked chiseled out of stone. He dropped to one knee and explained his situation. When the pass collapsed, he cut his way out with what was left of his men and bolted into the mountains to lay low from both Chong's scouts and the Empire's executioners. Word of our two triumphs had reached him, so he came to pledge his loyalty. Wei Ming had redirected him to me. 800 frontier troops. Hardened veterans, not raw rookies, wanted to sign up with us. But it clicked for me right away what Wei Ming was playing at. Legally speaking, these guys were outlaws. Losing West Mountain Pass carried a death sentence. By taking them under my wing, I'd be sheltering fugitives wanted by imperial law. If this whole thing blew up, my neck would be on the chopping block right next to theirs. Our sole option for success was securing a massive win. Something so huge the court would simply turn a blind eye. More triumphs, more enemy casualties, and greater honor. Enough leverage to bargain for 800 pardons. I stared down at Lai Qian-shan, who was kneeling there. 800 war-torn troops from the border. True veterans who had clashed with Chong cavalry for years. Merged with my expanding numbers at both the ranch and the fortress. This was a total game changer. I made up my mind. Those 800 men of yours? I'll take every last one. Lai Qian-shan's face flooded with visible relief. He vowed that he and his brothers in arms would follow me anywhere, through hell or high water, without a second thought. I inquired how many of his men were capable riders, and he replied that most were. Then, he sprung another surprise on me. Aside from his 800 troops, upwards of 3,000 local villagers were also taking refuge up in the mountains. Wei Ming had instructed him to ask me how to handle them. 3,000 refugees. Once I clarified that the bulk were able-bodied young men, with few elderly or women. I made a swift call on the matter. Select 1,000 of the fittest and deploy them to the ranch. The remaining 2,000 will head to Ning Shan Fort. He offered his thanks, clearly deeply relieved. He genuinely worried I might turn them away. 2 days later, the fortress's blacksmith crew had tripled, exceeding 300. With that much extra manpower, arms production surged twofold. Oldly assured me he could fulfill all my gear requests within a 20-day window. Watching those bare-chested smiths hammering relentlessly in the scorching heat, I felt immense respect. They were full of gratitude, too. At our fort, they ate well, earned a proper wage, and had no fear of being abducted by Chong marauders. Meanwhile, Yu Shuang had finished picking 100 formidable women from the fort's inhabitants to assemble an all-female fighting squad. I inquired whether they'd be trained as cavalry or infantry. Both, she replied. Versatile riders who can charge on horseback and strike on foot. I gave her a thumbs up on our way back to the ranch. She then asked if I intended to help protect Lynchburg County from the Black Mountain clan. Not protect. Wipe them out, I corrected. She stared blankly and asked if I seriously expected to pull that off with just our 2,000 ranch fighters. I reminded her that the fort possessed another 1,000. Plus Lin Qing had several thousand garrison troops. So maybe 6,000 or 7,000 in total, stacked against 15,000 Chong cavalry. She asked if I was plotting another midnight ambush. I shook my head. That stunt worked twice before. But a third attempt was completely out of the question. The Black Mountain crew wouldn't be caught napping again. She demanded to know my actual strategy. I just grinned and promised she'd find out when the moment arrived. She mumbled under her breath about wanting to buck me off my mount. As we rode down into the valley, the view was breathtaking. Exactly 2,100 soldiers were standing in flawless formation across the drills. 800 frontier veterans, 1,000 fresh recruits, and 300 men from my own original unit. Wang Wu bellowed out my arrival, and every single man instantly dropped to one knee. "Hail, Commander!" I ordered them to rise. Wang Wu murmured that this was crucial for establishing dominance, ensuring every soldier knew exactly who provided for them and who bled for them. I joked that if the imperial court caught wind of this, they'd brand me a traitor raising a rebel force. Wang Wu discreetly noted that he had already dispatched a confidential message to the capital, along with Imo Ganchan's severed head per my orders. Whether we'd actually get a response remained unclear. I smiled, noting that silence might honestly play in our favor. I formally designated Shen Shan as our military envoy, quite a drop from his old title as deputy commander over at West Mountain Pass. But he took it without a peep. He mentioned that just being welcomed in was honestly generous. I told him to quit beating himself up over that defeat. Getting 800 soldiers out alive across hostile ground was a massive win. His eyes welled up, and he vowed that his life was mine from here on out. I gave his chest a solid tap and told him to hold on to it. Your life is meant for reclaiming West Mountain Pass. He swore he'd do it for his fallen comrades, and for all the locals who suffered. Right then, Yu Shuang stepped up next to me and told Sun Dainyu to get her 100 female troops assembled. They filed out onto the grounds and snapped into 2 sharp rows. Our numbers were scaling up, past 2,000 at the ranch, a solid 1,000 at the outpost, with fresh recruits showing up daily. It wasn't a matter of whether we could hold our own now. The real question was if we could pull off a victory massive enough to turn the tide of this whole conflict.